The first thing the main character saw when he opened the door of the house was the light on. He froze in front of the threshold, noticing a broad-shouldered figure in front of him addressing him by name. The man in the knight's armor casually moved his hand to the side and said that the main character had not done anything recently, so they no longer needed him. Xenos, in a shocked and confused state, could only say, "What?" Xenos began to make excuses that he was helping them all the time. It was his job one way or another. Astan frowned in disdain and noticed that he had been standing aside all this time. Raising both hands to the sides, as if showing that everything was a foregone conclusion and nothing could be changed, he added that their team would no longer need his magic. Astan said that they have become stronger and no one will harm them. Xenos reminded that if anyone gets hurt, he immediately begins to use a healing spell, and the protective magic at that moment makes them all invulnerable. He caught himself and continued to say that all the time he had been practicing magic that enhanced their abilities. The team cut him off, saying that he was lying to them. Rituals were performed in special robes covering the entire body and head. Intricate pentagrams with runes on different sides were drawn on earth, and it was in their middle that the wounded person was placed. Astan noticed that healing magic requires casting, and if the healer is wounded, it will all be interrupted. Astan casually waved his hand to the side, and looking down, said that Xenos could not help them in any way. Pointing his finger at his chest, Astan concluded his dialogue by saying that they would now work with royalty and aristocrats. They would not like it if a guy from the slums worked with them. Xenos opened his eyes wide at such a direct betrayal of his friends. In despair and anger, he shouted that they were partners. Immediately after his words, the muffled laughter of his former partners was heard. Astan, holding his head with his hand from laughter and trying to catch his breath, skeptically noted that Xenos still did not understand everything. Walking close to him, Astan said with a malicious grin that they were just using him. With a cold expression on his face, he continued his speech that Xenos is from the slums and therefore is only glad when he is fed and accepted into the team, and if Xenos was in danger, he would not help him at all. Xenos looked at his former partner in despair. Then, with a downcast expression on his face, he looked around at his other partners and, noticing their indifferent glances, concluded that from the very beginning he had no place here. In this country, there have long been divisions into classes, such as the royal family, aristocrats, townspeople, and the poor. Xenos had been accustomed to humiliation since childhood, so he decided to stay in a modest room, in which there was nothing else except a bed. He was very glad that he had a room at all. Every day Xenos honed his skills. He was very happy to help Astan, who took him out of the slums. Even if he had no place to study magic, he took with him a backpack, a lamp, books, and looked for a modest place to learn how to heal on his own. If he was treated poorly by his team, he would try his best to defend his teammates because they helped him get out of poverty. Xenos continued to study healing magic and tried to do his best in his training. His stream of memories was interrupted by Astan, who said that he was no longer with them. Xenos heard and noticed something round and golden rolling across the floor towards him. He asked in surprise, what was it? After which he bent down to take this thing. Astan, with very noticeable arrogance, said that most likely he was seeing this thing for the first time and that it was a gold coin. With greater mockery, he added that this was a payment that a poor man like Xenos would not earn in his entire life. With regret and shame, Astan continued his nasty speech, saying that he still could not believe how such a nonentity was on their team, and taking on a more sullen expression, he threatened not to tell him to anyone. Xenos realized that the gold coin was payment for silence. He parted his lips slightly and whispered, "Okay," with barely a hint of depression. Astan roughly pushed him aside and began to quickly close the doors, saying dryly and coldly that the conversation was over and he could get out. Xenos, with deep resentment at the betrayal of his friends, thought that they did not truly understand who they owed their strength to. Slowly descending and leaving the house, Xenos walked along the deserted streets, wondering what would happen next. Probably, even Xenos himself still does not know how parting with his partners will turn out for him. Sometime later, Xenos stood near a large wooden door with an iron border and thought that if he continued to be an adventurer, he would still not be able to register in the guild just because he was poor. Xenos heard a low male voice swearing at his assistants and reproaching them for shooting someone because he wanted to make money from this someone. Xenos looked back at the source of the sound and noticed that a girl was lying on the ground, with an archer and an unarmed, broad-shouldered man looming over her. The assistant chief began to apologize and make excuses by saying that she was constantly running away. Xenos looked in amazement at the shot girl, whose whole body was covered in bruises and her clothes were dirty and scuffed. An arrow protruded mercilessly from her back, and blood oozed slowly from the wound. At this time, the archer said in his defense that she would die anyway. The commander-in-chief reproached him for how he could shoot the elf. Xenos, taking a few steps forward closer to the bandits, warily asked if they seriously shot the child. Leaning over the wounded elf, the broad-shouldered man asked what he needed. The archer, jumping out as if in defense of his chief, said that this was his slave. Xenos, twirling in his hands the gold coin that Astan had given him for his silence, said that then he would buy the wounded elf. The archer asked suspiciously what. Almost immediately he began to swear angrily, but was immediately interrupted by the commander-in-chief, who squeezed his shoulder tightly. Xenos put his hand forward and, taking the coin more comfortably, began to show it to the slave trader. With a rough and sharp movement, the broad-shouldered man snatched the coin from his hands, saying that the elf was now his. Turning around and starting to walk away at a brisk pace, as if Xenos would soon change his mind about his decision, the bandit said jubilantly that the elf would die anyway, but at least they made money from her. Having stopped watching the departing slave traders, Xenos turned to the elf, asking her how she was feeling. She continued to lie there and not move, but literally a few seconds later, she made a barely noticeable groan and turned her head slightly towards him. Xenos, realizing that the elf was exhausted and dying, sharply grabbed the arrow sticking out in her back and quickly pulled it out. He placed his hand a short distance from her wound, beginning to heal using a long familiar spell that did not even need to be uttered for it to work. Threads began to spin around the wound, as if beginning to stitch it together, and a slight glow appeared. A couple of seconds later, she subtly asked if she was dead. Gently stroking her back, Xenos whispered in a calm and soothing voice that he would help her and not to worry. Although the wound had healed, her body was still weakened because it had lost a lot of strength. She barely noticeably jerked her head in a refusal gesture and said that there was no point in this help. Xenos, holding both hands in front of him, which were bent at the elbow, began to explain to the elf that the wound had already healed. After a few seconds, he asked her if she could talk. The elf sharply opened her eyes and stood up with some suspicion, beginning to carefully probe her back at the site of her recent injury. Having only felt a hole in her clothes after the arrow, she was even more surprised and, looking at him, asked in disbelief what. Literally a second later, she looked back at her back and shouted with enthusiasm that there was no more blood. Nothing hurt her anymore. Xenos, watching the girl, gloomily and distantly replied that he was a healer. Leaning his hands on his knees, he began to explain that he had pulled out the arrow and healed her wounds. All this time the elf continued to squeal joyfully that there was no wound, although she was already thinking about her death. Tired of listening to the elf's overly joyful and relieved cries, Xenos reprimanded her that she was too exaggerating the significance of the scratch she had. The elf was confused for a second and asked if he was joking about the scratch. She averted her eyes, saddened by the emotions she had recently experienced, to the side, not wanting to meet the healer's gaze. Xenos sharply noticed the change in the girl's mood and, sitting a little closer to her, extended his hand and asked what was wrong. The elf still did not raise her gaze, but simply squeezed his palm tightly. A moment later, the girl raised her bottomless eyes, which were filled with tears of gratitude. She began to thank him very loudly and very sensually for saving her. Xenos, looking at her dumbfounded, was shocked that he was thanked for the first time for healing. He trained with sweat and blood for many years, but all this time they did not believe him when he used magic without casting right in front of their eyes. His former partners treated him terribly because he didn't even have time to explain anything. Sitting on each other's knees, Xenos asked the elf if these men were slave traders. The elf, starting to cry again, quietly whispered that they were slave traders and they caught her yesterday. She could have managed to escape because she noticed them earlier, but they still managed to catch up with her and shoot. Xenos, as soon as the girl finished her story, asked what her name was. Immediately after Lily said her name, she asked him about the money he gave to the slave traders. Xenos waved his hand indifferently and replied that if it was about the gold coin he paid them, then he got it for nothing. Lily asked him what his name was and whether he was a famous healer. Xenos slowly and clearly answered the elf's questions, first saying his name. A little later, he answered the second question that healing magic is individual and few people know about it. Some time after their conversation, Xenos stood up and concluded by saying that being captured by slave traders was terrible. He asked where she lived and offered to take her home. The girl sadly lowered her head, resting her hands on her knees, and quietly said with sadness that she had no home. Xenos froze. This girl reminded him very much of herself in the past. Xenos wondered why the elf child lived on the street. He looked at the elf, understanding her feelings and emotions, and said that they had a problem. The elf looked up at him questioningly. Xenos looked kindly at the elf and offered to eat first. Some time later, Xenos and Lily were already sitting in the shop. Lily exclaimed with joy and, taking a spoon, began to eat. As soon as she had eaten a little, she asked him why he didn't eat anything himself. At this time, Xenos looked at the glass that the waitress brought him and slowly twirled it in his hands. After a short silence and thinking about the answer, he quietly and indistinctly said that he was not hungry and would just drink water. Lily, continuing to periodically look at him and continue to eat, asked him if he worked somewhere. Xenos, having stopped looking blankly into the glass, replied that he had been kicked out of the team and now had nowhere else to go. Lily was surprised and, slightly tilting her head to the side, took on a gentle expression on her face, saying that now they were together. Xenos sadly and puzzledly looked at the other half of the table next to Lily and, after thinking a little, said that nothing could be done and now he had to look for a temporary job. His disappointed thoughts were muffled by the sharp opening of the door and the sound of someone's slow and heavy steps. The waitresses immediately began to fuss, noticing the wounded figure of a creature with long ears, an elongated tail like a lizard, and a human body. He walked, pressing his left hand to the other and grimacing in pain, clenching his teeth. Someone's cry rang across the counter for water to be brought to the wounded man. Xenos continued to carefully examine this strange man, and once again looking at his tail, the scales on his cheeks, hands, and long nails that did not look like human ones, he concluded that this was a lizardman. He, still continuing to examine the lizardman, took a closer look at his disfigured hand from burn marks and bullet wounds. The lizardman's arm was covered in swollen black veins. Xenos, pushing his chair away from him, stood up and approached the wounded lizard. He immediately asked him what happened to his hand. The lizardman, continuing to hold one hand with the other, and also continuing to wince in pain, waved it off and said that nothing had happened. Looking again at the lizard's disfigured hand, Xenos asked to confirm his guess whether it was a magic pistol. Grimacing once again, the lizardman began to mutter through his teeth with feigned calm that he had been taken by surprise. Already in despair, he grabbed his head with his hand and added that he would no longer be able to use his hand. The lizardman admitted with pain in his voice that he would so much like to relieve this pain. Xenos, leaning over him, reached out to his hand and began to examine the wound as carefully as possible. His gaze immediately became decisive and serious. He began to calm the lizard and told him not to worry. Xenos told the lizardman that the wound was not small and would heal quickly. Forgetting about the pain for a second, the lizardman, confused, and with the feeling that Xenos was laughing at him, began to ask again what he meant by saying this. Bending even further in front of the lizardman's hand, Xenos placed his palms on the lizardman's disfigured hand and, without touching the wound, explained in one word that this was all healing. Rough bumps and black veins began to slowly disappear from the lizard's hand under the bright shine of healing magic. The lizardman opened his mouth in shock, not believing his eyes. Literally within a minute, his hand was safe and sound. The lizardman quietly, still not recovering from shock, asked with notes of fear and delight in his voice, "What did Xenos do now, and who is he anyway?" Suddenly Lily appeared in front of the lizardman. Lily shouted with a solemn cry that Xenos is a great healer. Xenos awkwardly put his hand forward, trying to stop the elf, and quietly called her by name. The lizardman examined him carefully and, putting his hand into the bag hanging on his belt, said that since Xenos was such a good healer, he would remember him. Clawed hands sharply reached out to his palm and, opening it a little roughly, put something there. Xenos glanced at his half-closed palm without looking up. The lizardman stood up and began to leave, but before leaving, he turned, waved his hand at them, and shouted something goodbye. Lily looked at the healer with concern and asked what happened to him. He replied that nothing had happened. Xenos opened his palm and looked into it, realizing that the lizardman had given him gold coins as a token of gratitude for the healing. Xenos, still confused, continued to think that if they ate here, they had to pay, and the healer received money simply for treating wounds. Lily, having observed his internal struggle, noticed with some sympathy and pity that this was how it should be. Still clutching a handful of coins in his hand, Xenos confirmed Lily's statement. Removing his hand into his pocket with coins, Xenos asked Lily if she remembered what she said when he saved her life. Lily again covered his hand with her dome-like hands and said the word he asked about, "Thank you." And feeling a little embarrassed and still continuing to look into his eyes, she quickly said that she was glad, and that's why she expressed herself that way at that moment. Xenos was silent for a long time, pondering an idea. After a few moments, he firmly told himself that everything was decided. His recently shocked look turned into one of confidence and encouragement. Xenos said that he will now heal people. He hesitated, running one hand through his hair and looking down, sadly began to say that he would not be able to get a license and open his own business because he was poor, so he would have to be an underground healer. Lily looked at him with sparkling eyes filled with triumph and, joyfully pressing her hands to her chest, impatiently shouted that she would help him in healing. Xenos was surprised by Lily's strong enthusiasm, but remained silent. Xenos continued to think that from now on he would live the way he wanted. Lily reached her hands into him, as if she was trying to bring him back to reality from her thoughts. She shouted with confidence and a hint of anger that he was now her master, and she would now follow him. Xenos put his hands forward a little in a gesture, as if he was trying to calm Lily down a little, and said that he would only be her master until he found her a home. Lily screamed in delight, reaching her arms to his neck for a hug. At this time, Xenos continued to think about his own thoughts. Now he can do what he knows and get paid for it. Xenos told himself in his thoughts that if he can make someone happy, then he is not living in vain. He left several gold coins on the table next to an empty plate and an unfinished mug of water. Not long after they left the cafe, Xenos and Lily found themselves in the middle of an abandoned city. Lily looked at him with doubt and distrust and asked if he seriously wants to open a hospital here. With even greater doubt, she added that there were absolutely no people here. Without thinking twice, Xenos said that he wanted to open a hospital here. Having looked around the entire territory with a deserted gaze, Xenos began to explain that in the past there was an epidemic here and the city was abandoned. He also added that they will not be able to conduct business in densely populated cities without a license. Lily, pressing her hands to her chest, looked around with undisguised fear. Xenos noticed a more well-preserved building and suggested going inside. Even more frightened, Lily clung to him with her hands. Raising his eyebrows in surprise and looking at the frightened Lily, he asked her what was it. She looked at the building with alarm and whispered, "Maybe there were ghosts there." Xenos slowly moved towards the entrance of the building, taking Lily's hand so that she would be less afraid. Lily, still very worried, began to say that where many people die, monsters are born. With even greater anxiety and fear, she guessed that Rays might live here. Xenos asked Rays in surprise. Lily began to tell that in the hierarchy of the undead, she is the highest demon. A little later, she began to say that Rays looks like a human, but can kill with a simple touch. Xenos, without paying any attention to Lily's words, opened the doors of the abandoned building and slowly walked inside. Lily froze with fear. She was afraid to go inside the dark building. A strong light appeared in her hands, as if she was holding a lantern. Lily shouted that they had light. Xenos turned towards Lily with caution and undisguised surprise. He noticed a small circle of bright light in her hands. He asked her if she could use magic. Lily answered enthusiastically that it was quite easy. Xenos and Lily began to carefully examine the room because now the light conjured by Ellie made it possible. Xenos took a few steps towards the wall of the building and, carefully running his hand along the old logs, noticed that this was a pretty good place, but it would need to be repaired. Lily, who had recently been watching his actions, was distracted by rustling noises behind her. Turning slowly, she noticed in front of her a girl flying above the ground, dressed in a beautifully embroidered dress. Panic slowly overtook Lily, and she stuttered out that Rays was in the room. Ray's cool and tenacious gaze first grabbed onto Lily, and then slowly moved on to him. Xenos, looking at the devil who appeared in front of him, was right in guessing that there was someone here, because it was the most well-kept building in the area. With even greater horror and anxiety, Lily shouted at him to come to his senses. Rays said in a melodious voice, as if to herself, that she could smell life. With a sharp movement, she flew up to Xenos and, squeezing her palms around his head, began to demand that he give his life. Lily, frightened, jumped back a little and began frantically calling him by name. Xenos moved his hand to the side and, frowning his eyebrows, said loudly and clearly, "Healing." A snow-white light immediately appeared from his hand. Noticing this, Reyes pulled back a little, watching what would happen next, but she was immediately pushed away by a clot of healing energy a short distance. She pressed her hand to her chest, gasping for air. Xenos asked in a calm voice, "Is this the same Reyes?" Immediately after his question, he said that he had killed less than 100 of their kind in the depths of the underground labyrinth. Raising her eyebrows and opening her eyes in surprise, Lily asked again, "Hundreds?" Xenos, turning to Reyes, explained that they liked this building and would try not to disturb her. Xenos asked her if she would share this place. Reyes suddenly approached him again and with a deadly look asked what he was talking about. Reaching out her hand to his face, she whispered again about his life. But Xenos abruptly interrupted her, sending another source of healing magic at her. Reyes screamed in pain, and Xenos apologized and told her that she attacked him herself and should not take him to heart. She was tightly held by his magical tentacles, but literally after a few minutes Reyes tore them apart, and with rage in her eyes began to say that she would not forgive him, because he was the first person to insult her, the Queen of Ghosts. With a sharp and powerful movement, she raised her hand up and began screaming to call on her subordinates. Floating figures in robes began to appear in the room, and Reyes gave the command to kill the fool who dared to offend her. Lily, who had recently run up to him, began stuttering to repeat his name. Xenos lowered his eyebrows a little upset and noted with sadness that he wanted to discuss everything calmly. They were surrounded on all sides by figures in robes who were reaching out with their clawed hands towards them as if they wanted to tear them apart. Lily screamed in fear, pressing herself into the healer's chest. Xenos made a circular motion with his index finger, and with a sharp circular wave, he pushed away all of Camilla's subordinates with a loud cry, "Great healing." Camilla dropped her hands in resignation and, opening her eyes wide in surprise, quietly flew by, "What?" She couldn't believe how it was possible that a person could resist her and her powers. She asked what he was. Xenos shrugged his shoulders in embarrassment and replied that he was a humble underground healer. Camilla shouted the question indignantly modest. Xenos began to explain the reasons for their visit, saying that he was very sorry, but they would only need an office and a bedroom. Camilla opened her mouth in despair, unable to even say anything, and turned around, starting to climb to the second floor. Finally, she said that they could use the entire first floor, but the second floor was hers, so they couldn't go there. Xenos said that he really appreciated her help. Joyfully turning to Lily, Xenos said that they had succeeded. Lily, still recovering from fear, caustically remarked that she did not know whether to cry or laugh. A few days later, they rebuilt their own hospital, adding new windows, renovating the roof, and repairing cracks in the walls of the house. Lily sat at the table, leaning on her arm, and sighed with boredom. She had long ago put on a medical gown and a white cap. Once again sighing with boredom, Lily said that she was bored. At this time, Xenos, dragging boxes of papers and books, said that he was able to tidy up and would now renovate the room, which would become more like an office. Xenos sighed anxiously because several days had already passed and there were still no clients. Lily asked if she could go out and call someone. Xenos stopped her speech and said that in this way she could attract the attention of the royal hospital. Lily sadly lowered her gaze and said worriedly that no one would come to him like that. Laying books on the shelves, Xenos reassured Lily that soon someone would definitely come to them. A sudden knock was heard on the door, and immediately followed by someone's loud cry asking, "Is this his hospital?" Lily exclaimed joyfully that they really had come to them. She ran to the door and opened it with the words "Welcome," but abruptly broke off when she noticed a familiar figure in front of her. He frowned at Lily as she remembered him. Xenos, having stopped arranging the books, came out and noticed the lizardman and calmly said that he had finally arrived. The lizardman frowned in surprise and asked how he knew that he would come. Xenos, remembering his first meeting with the lizardman, said that your hand was burned with a magic pistol and you are an unusual civilian. And further reasoning logically, Xenos said that people like him have circumstances that do not allow them to visit ordinary hospitals. He added with a wave of his hand that this is where the underground healer comes in. The lizardman raised his hand to scratch the back of his head and said that it took him a while to find it. He said that this time he came with his sister. The distant sound of small heels was heard on the street and gradually approached the entrance of the hospital. The lizardman's sister walked up to Xenos with a confident gait and said that her brother had told her about the great healer. Lily looked at the two lizards and the healer with caution and distrust. The lizardman's sister approached and asked with interest if he would examine her. Xenos, looking down, began to doubt and said that he didn't know if he was really that good. Xenos and Lily took them to a new office. Having seated the lizardman on a chair, he began to listen to what happened to her. Lowering the sleeve of her cloak a little, she said that she had been shot from a pistol, and now he could see the consequences for himself. She continued her explanation that the magical weapon from which she was shot was laced with poison and, remaining in the body, the bullet began to rot. Xenos asked her in surprise, did she understand this just by looking at the wound? The lizardman replied that experiments had been carried out on her before, and therefore she understood only by looking at the wound. Xenos said it was all just terrible. The lizardman watched him and a little later asked him, will he cure her? Xenos, crossing his arms over his chest and subduing her with a wary look, said that if she was wounded not so long ago, then you can just pull out the bullet and everything will heal. Immediately after his words came the answer that 3 days had already passed. Xenos said that in this case, her hand is already on the verge of death, and it is better to cut it off before the poison spreads throughout the body. The lizardman looked to the side and, after thinking a little, asked how much it would cost. With a cold and impudent look, Xenos said that all this would cost 1,000,000 yen. Suddenly, her brother's angry scream ran through the office. What? The lizardman suddenly appeared in front of the healer and grabbed the collar of his cloak, shouting and asking, 1,000,000 yen just for cutting off your hand. Squeezing even harder, he muttered, is he in his right mind? The lizardman's calm and sharp voice walked through the room, ordering him to calm down. Crossing her legs together, the lizardman looked straight at the healer and said that this was a huge amount. A little later she added the question, does he know that she is Stormy Zofia? Xenos asked in surprise, is she really the head of the lizard bandits? Snapping her fingers, Zofia said that 1,000,000 yen was too much for such an operation, and let him give at least one reason why she should pay so much. Immediately after her click, Probe put a dagger to the healer's neck, the blade of which sparkled beautifully in the light. Xenos suddenly asked them who told him that he was going to cut it off. Trying not to pay attention to the blade presented to him, Xenos said that this would be a pointless operation if he did not regenerate afterwards, and this could be quite tedious. Xenos immediately added that it doesn't matter who his patient is, a worker or a king, everyone must pay for someone else's work. He firmly said that he would not work for free. The lizardman asked him with great concern, what did he mean about regenerating his arm? She admitted that this was the first time she had heard about this. Xenos asked if she was joking. And immediately after that he asked, can't other healers do this? A short time later, Xenos and Lily were told to lie down on the operating bed. Looking decisively at Zofia, he said that they would start now. Suddenly, various sparkling threads swirled around his hand and a scalpel appeared on his palm. Zofia, observing all this, asked, what is this? Xenos replied that this is a magic knife. It is a sterile thing and cuts through tissue well, and also automatically relieves pain in the area being operated on. Touching her shoulder with a blade, he said that he would now cut off the rotten part. The probe grimaced with hostility. Lily opened her eyes in fear, watching Xenos do his work. A couple of minutes later, her severed hand lay on the table. Xenos commented that he will now regenerate. Beads of sweat from exertion slowly began to run down his cheeks. Continuing to regenerate, he began to explain that the bleeding is prevented by protective magic, and with repeated use of magic, the restoration of the wound regenerates faster. He began to slowly restore the muscles of his arm and bones. Zofia asked in confusion, what? She raised her restored hand in surprise and began to sit up on the bed. At this time, Xenos said that he was finished and cured. Lily quickly pulled out a chair for him to sit down and rest. And Probe came up to his sister and whispered that this was simply amazing. Zofia, still continuing to look at her hand, said that this was the first time she had met such a healer. The Probe whispered that this was amazing. Suddenly everyone heard a rustling sound somewhere above. The Probe turned sharply and noticed the girl's head hanging on the ceiling, who had been watching them all this time. Raising his hand up and pointing his finger at it, Probe shouted, "Who else is this?" Xenos calmly looked at the ceiling and indifferently explained that it was their neighbor Ray's. Umbrella asked in surprise, "Ray's is your neighbor?" Ray's rolled her eyes and looked away, saying that she wanted him to fail and wanted to take his life. The Probe, still more surprised, shouted his next question, "Why is she slandering?" Still calmly, Xenos said that at heart she is a good person. Probe, not believing his words one bit, said that it didn't look like she was a good person. Suddenly a snort was heard. Zofia, watching the altercation between Probe and the healer, said that Xenos was simply amazing and no less interesting. Her ringing laughter from this whole situation spread throughout the office. With a quick movement, she picked up her cloak and, looking at him with gratitude, said that she liked Xenos, and they would definitely visit them again. Xenos, resting his hands on his legs, agreed and told them not to forget to pay. Stormy Zofia waved goodbye and disappeared with her brother into the night shadows. Over time, the name of the unknown healer gradually began to spread. A little later, new patients began to come to him. Having received another of them and already seeing off the lizardmen, Xenos closed the doors. Lily immediately called him, saying that she had prepared tea and was already pouring it into cups. He looked at her with a warm smile and thanked her for her concern. Sitting down in a chair, he noticed that Reyes was already sitting in front of him and calmly sipping tea. Skid asked her if she was drinking with them again. Closing her eyes with pleasure and taking her first sip, Reyes answered, of course. Lily sat down next to him and noticed that Xenos had been very busy lately. Xenos, without touching his cup of tea, answered Lily that after their leader's visit, lizardmen from the Thieves' Guild began to constantly visit here. He added that he helps them if they pay him. Lily asked why lizardmen get hurt so often. Taking a mug and sipping some tea from it, he replied that perhaps he had a conflict with someone. He began to explain that in the slums where the bandits usually camped, there were 3 known factions of Inhumans. Taking another sip, he continued his explanation that one of these were lizard people, and the others were tribes of orcs, whose bodies were as strong as steel. He didn't have time to finish speaking to the third group. Someone opened their door with a strong blow and began to go inside the hospital. Lily jumped up suddenly, asking who it was. A crowd of wolves came to them, dressed like people, and some of them were even armed. A confident female voice sounded, and the wolves began to part, making way for her. Walking proudly towards the healer's table, the she-wolf said that who would have thought that the hospital would be in such and such a place. A feignedly benevolent smile appeared on her face, revealing her fangs. She asked him if he was an underground healer. Xanos agreed that he was an underground healer. He asked her, "Who is she?" The she-wolf spread her arms to the sides, as if showing her power, and loudly said that she was Linga, the leader of the werewolves. Placing her hand on her side, Linga began to listen to what the healer had to say to her. Xenos, looking down at the floor, said that he had heard about her. He complained that you all come here one after another. He asked what the head of one of the 3 groups wants. Linga said with feigned pity that it was already after hours. Xenos, running his hand through her hair and interrupting her, said that if the situation was emergency, he would take a look. Linga quickly found herself near the healer and pulled her clawed paw towards his throat, almost hissing that he was the emergency. Her sweet smile turned into a bloodthirsty one. She angrily muttered that no matter how much they fought with her subordinates, each time they became more and more alive. She thinks it's quite strange. Linga said that he was an excellent healer and nodded her head in confirmation of her words. Immediately after, she said that she had come to kill him. Xenos realized that they would not be able to talk. One of her assistants approached her with an axe and, carefully taking it from both sides, gave it to his queen. Linga, meanwhile, continued that if he died, then there would be no one to treat her subordinates. Linga took the axe and immediately began to swing at him, saying that then she could defeat her. Xenos didn't even try to dodge the blow. Linga shouted furiously, "What?" She screamed even louder, not a scratch. At this time, Xenos was rubbing his bruised shoulder. He looked at Linga and explained to her that he had covered his body with protective magic. Linga turned to her assistants with a cry, "Help!" He was surrounded by a crowd of werewolves who began to beat him with axes. And much time later, Xenos stood up and looked at the werewolves with indifference. Unable to bear it, he asked, "Maybe that's enough." Linga stood on all fours and screamed in surprise, "It can't be!" Linga turned to her subjects again and gave the order that they destroy the building. Xenos, having heard her order, gave advice that this should not be done, but the werewolves had already gone outside and began to destroy the building with axes. Xenos heard the werewolves say that since they could not kill him, they would destroy the hospital and he should not underestimate their strength. Suddenly, the werewolves stopped following the order after hearing her question, "Why was it so cold?" Reyes suddenly appeared in front of them, and the werewolves, frightened, began to turn around and run away. Xenos, nervously rubbing his head at this time, explained to her that he had guessed about her appearance because they were neighbors. Ray's nasty gaze fell on Linga, and she asked how they dare to attack her fortress. Camilla approached one of the werewolves. Xenos shouted for her to wait, and he understands her feelings perfectly. He remarked to her that in his office they save lives, not take them. Camilla looked at him a little ashamed and shocked and let the werewolf go. Xenos thanked Camilla for not getting angry. Camilla said distantly that this is all for the sake of the fortress, and besides, it is now quite more comfortable here than before. Linga asked in surprise, "Did you hear what she said?" Xenos turned around and began to leave, but Linga called out to him. She immediately fell to her knees and began to ask him for forgiveness. Xenos opened his mouth in shock. Linga admitted that they knew that Xenos is the owner of Rays. She immediately shouted to the other werewolves to bow down. Skid confusedly put her hands forward, as if she was trying to lift the lingu of her assistants with such movements. He tried to say that he was not the master of Rays, but Linga interrupted him again, saying that they were expressing their sincerity to the master of Rays, the supreme being. Xenos pursed his lips, closed his eyes, and, drawing more air into his chest, told them to listen to him. Some time after the situation with the werewolves, one of the subordinates of the three groups came to their hospital. He asked him if he was an underground healer. Without waiting for an answer, he immediately explained that it was at the request of the orc leader, Levi. Xenos said under his breath that he had guessed about their coming. Lily heard him and asked, "Did you know?" Xenos calmly explained that the lizardmen came, the werewolves came, and now here are the orcs. Already turning to the orc, he asked why the head of the orcs did not come in person. Does this mean he is sick? Orc said that Levi can't move. Putting his hand forward, Xenos said that if the patient could not come himself, then he would have to visit him himself. After saying goodbye to Lily, Xenos followed the orc. Sometime later, they found themselves near high rocks, which were enclosed by a high fence. The orc turned to him and pointed to the large gate through which they would have to go. Xenos and the orc walked along an oblong corridor in which a long carpet was laid out. At the end of the corridor stood the throne of the orc leader. As soon as they got there, the orc knelt down with reverence and said that he had brought an underground healer. Xenos glanced at the orc leader sitting on the throne, who personally introduced herself by name. He asked how she knew about him. Levi, leaning her elbow on the throne, began to tell how the lizardmen and werewolves said that Xenos is an excellent healer, but they don't want to attract his attention to her, so they won't tell anything. With a smug grin, Levi said that's how she found out. Xenos wanted to say something about them, but he was immediately interrupted by the leader of the orcs. Levi, leaning her head on her hand, asked him if he knew the reason why she couldn't move. Xenos scratched his chin and, fixing his gaze on Levi, sharply extended his hand and gave a command to the magic inspection. Levi tensed and pressed her hands to the throne on both sides. She carefully looked at Xenos' further actions. A little later, when she noticed some kind of glow around her, she asked him what he was doing. Xenos replied that there were no injuries on her body, so he was checking from the inside. A small bolt of his magic stopped next to Levi's stomach. Xenos concluded that she was worried about a hard lump in her stomach and a feeling of magical power. After thinking a little more, he asked if it was a magic stone. Levi's eyes lit up, and she remembered that she actually had an extremely powerful magic stone called Explosion in her stomach. Magic stones were crystals filled with magical elements. They have effects similar to magic. Among them, the Explosion Stone was the highest class of magic stones used for attack. Xenos, looking gloomily, asked if someone seriously fed her this stone. Levi, holding her belly and starting to giggle, said that she ate it by accident, mistaking it for a rice ball. Xenos asked if she had a brain. Laughing even more, Levi said that, as he saw, she was a glutton. Xenos said that it might sound funny, but if she left everything as it was, then one day he would come out naturally. He turned his back to her and began to walk away. Levi immediately objected. Xenos turned in her direction and began to listen to what she said next. She explained that she accidentally inhabited part of the outer shell. She added that there is not much time, and with any wrong movement, the stone will explode. Xenos asked her, is that why she doesn't move? Levi was immediately surrounded by orcs, saying that they would die with her. Levi said that they need to be taken far away. Xenos asked her, what about him? Levi said with a reverent smile that they would donate their wealth to him. Xenos was surprised at this proposal. Levi threw something in his direction with a smooth movement of her hand. Reacting sharply, Xenos grabbed the thing flying towards him and, opening his palm, saw there a golden key with a shiny stone, which was inserted into the very top. Levi at this time said that if the stone exploded, then the orc tribe would end. She added that it was better to give everything they had to him than to let the bandits steal from them. A little later, Levi said that she had heard a lot about his neutrality, because of which he examines children for free. And then she cheerfully and loudly added that she also loves children. The orcs behind her laughed and shouted loudly that they would follow her. Xenos, holding the key tightly in his hand, asked Levi how long ago she ate the stone. Holding her stomach with her hand and suddenly losing her cheerful expression, she replied that she had eaten it recently and immediately sent her subordinates to him after swallowing it. Xenos turned to her and slowly walked towards the throne. Levi said that when he cast the spell, the stone was still in her stomach. Stretching his hand forward, Xenos summoned his magical scalpel. He walked up to Levi and raised the stone directly above her stomach. Levi pressed herself closer to the throne, not understanding what Xenos wanted to do. At that time, he warned the leader of the orcs, telling her not to move. With a confident movement, he plunged the scalpel into the middle of her stomach and slowly moved the tip down, cutting through all the tissue. Xenos warned her not to bite her tongue. Levi, watching as her stomach was cut, opened her mouth slightly, gasping nervously for air. With an attentive expression on his face, Xenos found the stone, pushing the walls of the layers of skin further apart. He said loudly that he had found a magic stone called Explosion. Suddenly, orcs burst into the hall with angry shouts and asked Xenos what he was doing. Levi watched with frightened round eyes as Xenos swarmed inside her stomach. 2 orcs crept up to Xenos' back and were already reaching out to pull him away. One of them shouted threateningly for Xenos to move away from Levi. Xenos immediately pulled the stone out of Levi's stomach and, holding it up, showed it to the orcs, who tried to grab it and take it away from the leader. Levi, still clinging to the throne in fear, asked him what he just did. Still holding the stone, Xenos calmly replied that he cut her stomach and pulled out the stone, then closed the wound. Levi, looking down in surprise and placing his hand on his stomach at the sight of the recently healed incision. I asked if he could do something similar. Xenos twirled the stone in his hands, examining it carefully. Levi abruptly jumped up from the throne and ran towards him, screaming, warning him that he needed to be careful, because with one wrong move the stone would explode. Xenos, continuing to look carefully, realized that Levi was right and, covering it with his palms, sharply crushed the stone. The mountains in which the orcs lived shook loudly and began to crack a little from the strong explosion. Levi and her subordinates closed their eyes at the loud sound. Having opened them, they asked in surprise what and how he was still alive. Relieved, Xenos raised his hands as if checking for damage, and with an exhalation said that it was all over. Xenos explained that he covered his palms with protective magic. Then he added that it hurt, but he healed everything. Levi sat down on the throne in surprise. Xenos apologized for interrupting the emotional scene and, moving closer to Levi, said that he was returning the key to the treasury to her. Levi, even more surprised, looked at how the key fell into her palm again. Xenos noted that he could have taken the treasure silently. He confirmed that he requires payment for his work, but this operation did not cost a fortune. Having chuckled and adopted a friendly grin, Levi abruptly hugged him from behind with loud words that she liked him. Exhaling and bending over from the heavy grip of the orc leader, he opened his eyes in amazement. With an open smile, she began to tell him that he was a real benefactor for the orcs. She added that if something happened, they would immediately come to him. With a dissatisfied and darkened look, Xenos said that he did not want this. Suddenly, Levi announced that she was hungry. She asked him if he wanted rice balls. Frowning even deeper, Xenos muttered that he would no longer help her. Sometime later, when Xenos came to the hospital, Lily was sitting at the table and, pouting her lips, thinking about something of her own. Noticing Lily's bad mood, Xenos asked if something happened to her. Lily muttered and, rising from the table, said that Zofia, Linga, and Levi have been coming often lately. Xenos, initially not paying any attention to this at all, ran his hand through his hair and agreed that they really often come, even when they are not injured. On Mondays, Zofia usually comes. Linga comes on Wednesdays and Levi comes on Fridays. Lily asked if he knew why they were coming. Lily said that it felt like they had a lot of free time. Xenos explained that such important people must be very busy. Lily admitted that she didn't understand anything then. Camilla suddenly appeared in front of them and, with a bored look, voiced Lily's guess that they had fallen in love. Camilla, assuming a cunning and malicious look, repeated once again for complete confirmation that they were in love with him. Zenos said with confusion that this was nonsense because he was an underground healer without a license. Camilla, smiling maliciously, said that nothing could be hidden from her, and they all had a loving look. She added that she knew better, because she had been living for 300 years. Lily drooped again and sat down on the table, saying that she was very worried. Zenos asked her why. Lily replied seriously that soon these 3 girls would fight for him and start a large-scale war. Camilla said with a sly smile that Lily should do everything possible to entertain her. Looking tenderly at Lily, she added that women in love are always beautiful. A little embarrassed, Lily thanked her. And after staying with them for a few more minutes, Camilla flew to her second floor. Zenos, seeing the retreating figure out, asked why she had come. After a while, Monday came again. Without breaking her traditions, Zofia came to him, bringing with her a huge cart with apples, bananas, melons, and watermelons. Taking the freshly poured red apple of her hand, she turned to him and announced that she wanted to start a war. She extended her hand with the apple in his direction and asked if he would come over to her side. Zenos just exhaled questioningly. A day later, on Wednesday, Linga came to him, bringing with her a cart with various seafood. Purposefully clenching her hands into fists, she said that she had decided to end things with them, and she wanted him to be on her side. Zenos stood in front of the cart with fruit that Zofia brought him. He still made a puzzled sound and said nothing more. A day later, Levi came to him and, with feigned restraint, declared that she would destroy them. Behind her stood a cart with fresh and chopped meat. Behind him were carts with fruit and seafood. One of the octopuses managed to escape and now sported an accessory on the healer's head. He exclaimed doomedly that they had all waited. He immediately remembered Ray's words that they would start a war. Camilla whispered to him that it looked like someone would die for him. Zenos waved her off and told her to stop talking such nonsense. Lily puffed out her cheeks with resentment and looked at him displeased. He asked her why she was sulking. Zenos, with wariness and excitement, asked what was happening. It looks like the battle of 3 girls for an underground healer is about to begin. After some time, all the groups gathered near the Colosseum. Zofia, with her huge army of lizard people, said that today she will show everyone who is the strongest here. Grinning fervently, Linga and her army of werewolves said that today everything would be different. And that before she mercifully pitied everyone. Levi, standing next to her strong subordinates, watched their altercation with a predatory gaze and asked with ridicule, "Do they seriously think that they can defeat her great orcs?" Grinning, she hoped that they had already said goodbye to this world. Suddenly, the 3 of them were interrupted by someone screaming, "Wait!" The leaders of the factions turned around and saw the healer with Lily. Zofia asked skeptically, did he come to dissuade them from war? Looking at him innocently, Linga said that she adored him, but could not fulfill such a request. Zenos said with confidence that this is not what he was there for. He said he understood the absurdity of the situation. Zenos continued to explain that it was unlikely that they would have come to fight there because of him, and in fact, interspecies enmity had been lurking between them for a long time. Losing self-control, he shouted at them to do whatever they want, and it's their business. Lily chimed in loudly after his speech. Zadornov grinned. Zofia was glad that Zenos was not against their battle. Sticking her hand slightly forward, she asked, "How about the winner getting Zenos?" Linga shouted that she was in business. Levi calmly and confidently said that she was the only one worthy of him. Zenos, hearing what the girls were talking about, was surprised and loudly asked, "What?" Lily reproached him for claiming that the leaders were disinterested in him. Suddenly, there was a general cry, "Forward!" Zofia took off and immediately began to fight off the orcs attacking her. She pierced one of them with daggers. At that time, Linga, jumping high, flew with an axe straight down at the lizardman, and with a sharp movement hit him on the head with the axe. At this time, Livy grabbed the werewolf's eyes with her hands and threw thousands of stones onto him. It was still day outside the arena walls. One of the orcs took a huge stone in his hands and prepared to throw it at the lizardman, but he managed to react in time and slashed the orc with a dagger, starting from the chest and ending up to the thigh. 2 orcs surrounded one werewolf and swung at him with tightly sharpened spears. At that time, there was a lizardman behind them who was aiming a dagger at one of the orcs. The battle continued until nightfall. Zofia, pressing the daggers to her shoulder, asked suspiciously why. She quietly said that she could not defeat them and lowered the daggers down. Levi shouted that she couldn't defeat them either, she added. That everything hits and hits them, but there's no point. Swinging her fist at one of the werewolves, Levi muttered that she should have killed several dozen long ago, but almost no one was hurt. Linga, raising her hand, said that how could they not notice the rapid healing of the wounds? All three leaders, their faces dirty from dust and abrasions on their cheeks, turned to face the healer, who was standing and watching their battle. Crossing his arms over his chest and closing his eyes peacefully, he said that he kept his word and did not dissuade them from fighting. A glow appeared in his hand, and he explained that they were all his patients, and if they were injured, he must heal them. Xenos put his hands forward, continuing to heal everyone in the arena. Zofia lowered her gaze and, without hiding her delight, said, "That's how it is." She added that it was his duty to monitor their health. She still couldn't believe that he could treat an entire crowd for so long. Zofia also added that he refused to join any race, and she thought that he would not support anyone. Linga clenched her fists and said that then everything that happened was meaningless. Xenos agreed with the orc leader's statement with a grin. Levi said that this was all pointless because they would just endlessly beat each other and recover, beat and recover. Having concluded, she explained that this would lead to nothing. Linga, not so enthusiastically, asked if they really wanted to continue. Xenos shouted to them that he would treat them until they were tired of the boring battle and, of course, for a certain fee. Levi crossed her arms over her chest and looked down, not participating in the conversation at all. With a loud clang, daggers and axes began to fall to the ground, indicating that the battle had come to an end. Laughing loudly, Zofia repeated his recent words that he also had to pay. Levi, spreading her arms to the side and adopting a malicious expression on her face, asked why they should continue then. Bent over, Levi rested her hands on her knees and concluded that it was time to finally end it all. Anger, resentment, hatred that was passed down from generation to generation. They're tired of it. They shouted together that they would live in peace and bumped fists. Now it became clear to them that this endless battle would lead to nothing. Suddenly Zofia said, that now they have another reason to fight. Linga shouted the healer's name. Levi firmly and decisively declared that she would not lose this battle. Xenos asked tiredly, what are they talking about? Narrowing her eyes, Lily teased him that he was in hot demand. Suddenly Lily asked why he was trying so hard to help everyone. Crossing his arms over his chest, he replied that a healer had once told him that third-rate, underground healers were suitable for treating wounds and injuries. Still watching the leaders, he continued his story, already talking about second-rate ones who save people's lives, and only the best healers are able to change the whole world for the better. Smiling proudly, he added that even as a third-rate healer, he hoped to bring at least some benefit to this world. Lily looked at him with a knowing look the whole time. Xenos still continued to look forward, a soft smile and warm gaze on his face. Now Lily looked at him with undisguised warmth and very great interest. Suddenly she pulled his sleeve and called his name. He asked her what it was. Lily, continuing to hold his sleeve with her small hand, told him that she really liked him. A little surprised by such a quick change in conversation, Xenos looked at her and replied that she was also dear to him. Pursing her lips and looking offendedly to the side, Lily muttered, he really didn't understand or was just pretending. Suddenly, someone in the arena said that we should get ready to go home. A second later, the question followed, will they go for the money? Immediately after the question, a loud voice was heard, of course. And just like that, one healer from the slums put an end to a long interracial feud. And this high-profile event will undoubtedly affect his future. The Kingdom of Hazes was a large city, surrounded by continuous high mountains and pine forests. A girl in armor came into the room and asked if the commander wanted to see her. Turning to her and smiling barely noticeably in greeting, he said that he had been waiting for her. Placing his right hand on his heart and his left hand behind his back, Krishna asked why he called her so suddenly. The commander said that he had heard disturbing rumors. Krishna asked again, rumors? The commander, holding his chin with his hand, said that the long-term war between non-humans had suddenly stopped and that they had decided not to quarrel anymore. Krishna asked if he was joking. She added that everyone knows about the long, ongoing struggle for championship. She suddenly wondered if maybe someone had finally gained the upper hand and killed everyone else. Krishna admitted that they had made peace with each other. The commander, crossing his arms, said with hostility that one person had reconciled them. Krishna froze, experiencing mixed feelings. The Kingdom of Hazes has always had a strict caste system. The townspeople were unhappy with the poor, and the poor were at enmity with the townspeople. This unbreakable balance was maintained for many years. But suddenly someone appeared capable of reconciling the three cruel races. This could all become a national problem. The commander raised his hand and began to explain that as defenders of the kingdom's order, they could not allow such a thing to happen, and so he called her. After hearing the order, Krishna bowed down and reverently said that he could rely on her, and she would not allow anyone to violate the principles. A smug grin stretched across the commander's face, and he said that he was waiting for good news from the Iron Lady. At this time, in the hospital, Xenos accidentally sneezed. Linga immediately approached him, holding his hand, and asked, "Did he catch a cold?" She added that she could keep him warm with her fur. Livy said she could help with a big, warm hug, and Lily said that she went to make him tea. He was seated on a chair and surrounded on all sides. Xenos, looking doomedly at the leaders, said that they were going too far. Suddenly, he irritably asked not to disturb anyone anymore because he needed to focus on healing. He took the hand of the leader of the lizardmen, on which there was a huge cut, and began to heal. Zofia straightened her arms and began to admire their integrity. She shouted that she was delighted with his healing skills. At this time, Probe approached him, who also had wounded hands. At this time, Lily brought him a tray of tea and noticed that Zofia had not come simply as a guest for a long time. Zofia threw her cloak over herself and explained that the royal guard considered them criminals, which is why they were persecuting them. Rubbing his hand, Probe added that they often have to fight off these annoying types. Xenos took a mug of hot tea and noticed that he and his brother had already been seriously wounded in the arm once. Wrapping her arms around herself, Zofia said, "That's what he's talking about." A little later, Zofia explained that she was merciless. Xenos asked who she was. Cringing a little, Zofia replied that she was the deputy commander of the guard. She is also called the Iron Lady. Zofia said that this is a cruel girl who can kill without a shadow of regret on her face. Camilla suddenly appeared in the room and, giggling a little, said that it would be problematic if such a woman also fell in love with him. Then she asked, "Doesn't he think so?" Lily, hearing what Camilla was talking about, asked again, "Will she fall in love?" Xenos waved his hand and said that he didn't care. Having concluded, he said that it turns out that they are fighting with the royal guard. Looking up, Camille said she had a bad feeling. Xenos crossed his arms over his chest and replied that it was useless to worry about something that had not yet happened at all. Xenos looked at Lily with joy and asked if they would have lunch soon. Lily nodded, indicating that lunch would be soon. Zofia crossed her arms and said that she liked vegetable dishes. Linga, clenching her two fists, said that she wanted a fish. Levy, with one hand on her side, said that meat is the best food. Suddenly Xenos cut them off, saying that he didn't ask them. Running his hand through his hair, he sighed and complained about how finicky it was. He said he hoped there would no longer be such difficult clients. Camilla suddenly began to say that this is how Xenos ends up in an endless series. Suddenly Camilla disappeared without finishing her sentence. Xenos called out to her and made a remark that maybe she would stop disappearing halfway through a sentence. Sometime later, the Iron Lady came to the long-abandoned city due to a long-standing plague epidemic. With a sharp and steely gaze forward, she quietly asked, "Are these not just rumors?" There were lizard men on the streets of this city, laughing and hugging werewolves. Next to the cafes, werewolves and orcs sat and played cards, and in the bars, like old friends, orcs and lizardmen drank various infusions. The girl was walking down the street and whispered that this couldn't be true. Looking down, she concluded that the man really was able to measure 3 races. Stopping in front of one of the lizardmen, she looked at him and asked if he could have a few words. The lizardman, smoking a hookah, asked her in response, "What is it?" The girl looked at him warily and began to explain that she had not been here for a long time and quite a lot had changed here. The lizardman, continuing to smoke a hookah, asked her, "Is it true?" The girl looked to the side at the werewolf passing by, and the orc said that she had never seen 2 races communicate so nicely with each other. The lizardman laughed cheerfully and explained that this was no longer surprising because they were no longer fighting. The girl recalled that they were on bad terms. She asked what happened. Taking a drag, the lizardman carefully examined the girl and stood up with an apology, saying that she looked rather suspicious. With a final wave of his hand, he said that he couldn't tell her, so let her take it for granted. He asked skeptically, after all, things didn't get better after they began to live in peace. She was humiliated by the lizardman's words. Krishna asked with disdain and hostility. Take it for granted? She shouted in a sharp, firm voice for him to stop. Krishna ran up to him, and her cloak, fluttering in the wind, revealed iron armor and a magic pistol. The lizardman saw this and was afraid, freezing in place. With a quick movement of her hand, the Iron Lady took out a pistol and put it to the lizardman's chest. The lizardman began to ask her with a mixture of fear, who is she? With a deadly and cold voice, she said that only she asks questions. Pressing the pistol even harder into his chest, she asked where this man lived. She pressed her finger on the trigger a little harder, putting moral pressure on the lizardman. Stuttering, he began to tell her that he would not say anything, because he had helped them a lot, and now they were in his debt. Raising his head proudly, he said that even if she threatens him, he still won't tell anything. Krishna was interrupted sharply by a very familiar voice from behind. The lizardman looked to the side in fear, noticing his leader and his brother. The Iron Lady turned, and now also saw Zofia and Zond walking sweetly, whom she had not so long ago shot with a magic pistol. Sharply pushing the lizardman aside, she ran after them. Krishna continued to run, thinking that it was not worth engaging in a fight with the head of the lizard people and her brother on their own territory. She suddenly wondered, weren't their hands badly injured? Why are they in such good condition? Krishna continued to look at them in surprise and mentally exclaimed, what is going on here? At this time in the hospital, Xenos clasped his hands tightly on his chest and complained that he felt cold. He sat on the sofa, leaning back on the bed, and noticed that calm had finally come because everyone had left. Suddenly, the door opened slightly and loud and heavy footsteps were heard. The cloaked figure excused himself and walked inside the room. Continuing to sit on the sofa, Xenos opened his eyes in surprise. Krishna said with feigned embarrassment that she was a little lost. Xenos got up from the sofa and ran his hand through his hair and replied that she was unlucky. Turning to him, she said that she apologized for the interrupted rest. Xenos waved it off and replied that everything was fine. The girl asked how to get to the city. Xenos immediately began to explain how to get there. Suddenly the door opened and Lily came into the room with a cup of tea, asking if this was a new patient Xenos. Krishna, recognizing Lily as an elf, muttered that this was cruel and how dare he use her as a slave. The Iron Lady took out a pistol, took aim, and, without hesitation, pulled the trigger. Lily put her hands to her mouth and screamed his name. Dust rose everywhere in the building from the strong fall of the healer. Raising her weapon, Krishna said that she could not stand child abductors and would see to it that he received due punishment. Lily called his name, but there was silence. Krishna turned to her and said that Lily is an elf and he is not her parent or master, so now she is free. She added as if she wanted to console Lily so that she would not worry, because she would now take him into custody. Lily suddenly shouted that Xenos was not a criminal. She continued to shout that he was her savior and freed her from slavery. Not believing the girl's words, she asked what. Touching her chin and trying to see something in the dust Xenos kicked up as he fell to the floor, she said that perhaps she had jumped to conclusions. Lily, starting to cry, shouted that she shot him just like that. Krishna said that she must act quickly in her work so that no one is missed. She apologized and began to justify that she took her responsibilities seriously. Closing her eyes, she said that now Xenos will be unconscious for some time. Meanwhile, Xenos suddenly told her that she should have at least made sure that he was a criminal before shooting. Krishna turned sharply, asking him what. Xenos rubbed the bruised back of his head while the Iron Lady glared at him. She asked him again how he did it. Clearing her throat, she apologized and said she was glad for his integrity, but how did he do it? At this time, Lily ran to hug him, and Xenos himself casually replied that this was protective magic. Krishna raised her hand and said that he must be joking because simple defensive magic could not stop the bullet from her magic gun. Xenos said indifferently that he had succeeded. Krishna came close to his face and asked if he was lying. Looking at him with a tenacious gaze, Krishna concluded that he was not lying because there was not a scratch on him. Putting her hand to her chin and thinking, she supposedly asked the question, is he a famous magician? Continuing to think further, she said that he had mastered protective healing magic and was now accepting patients. Xenos objected and said that she was not entirely right. Krishna asked again furiously, not really. The Iron Lady said that she could not be mistaken because she is the deputy commander of the Royal Guard. Raising her head proudly and arrogantly, she asked if he understood her level. Xenos asked in confusion what. He pointed his finger at her and asked if she was really the deputy commander of the guard. She firmly agreed and said that she was better known by her nickname, the Iron Lady. Xenos frowned and narrowed his eyes, not knowing what to say. Putting her hand to her chest, she seriously said that she would be glad if he would help her in one investigation. Camilla at this time was sitting on the second floor and giggling. Xenos asked her what investigation he needed help with. Much time later, the three of them sat at the table with a mug of tea. Krishna said that she came to the slums on a secret mission to find and arrest one person. Xenos asked her why she so easily tells a stranger about this. Crossing her arms and rolling her eyes, she said it was only so they could collaborate. Krishna said that this criminal had never been caught by the Imperial Guards, and that meant that he was hiding somewhere. She added that if he was also hiding, he might have heard something. Taking a sip of tea, Xenos asked her who exactly she was looking for. She leaned on her palms and said that she was looking for the one who ended the war between non-humans in the slums. In unexpected surprise, Xenos splashed the tea he had taken into his mouth. Krishna asked, "What is this?" Xenos nervously waved it off and said that it was nothing. Camilla watched their conversation and giggled a few more times. Krishna thought that there would be no end to their war, but the situation has changed dramatically. She angrily said that as a guardian of order, she could not afford to simply forget about such an influential figure. Xenos opened his mouth in surprise. Krishna continued to say that even with threats, non-humans refuse to talk about him, and most likely, he controls their consciousness. She added that she was willing to bet he was a minion of the devil himself. Xenos repeated distantly, "A minion of the devil." Looking at the cup of tea, he asked her if she should continue her search. Xenos, covered in a nervous sweat all over his body, explained that it seemed that this criminal did not want to be found and did not want to stand out. It was better to leave him alone. Krishna measured him up with a murderous and cold-blooded look and, sharply leaning her elbows on the table, shouted, "Does he know him?" Xenos raised his hands as if giving up and said that he was just guessing. Krishna replied that she could not leave him because one day he might go against the state and become a threat. Xenos asked, maybe he doesn't even think about such a thing. Lily suddenly said with sincerity that he was a little greedy, but he really didn't like it when people suffered. Xenos abruptly interrupted her, calling her by name. Krishna immediately shouted, "So Lily knows him." Lily pursed her lips and said she didn't know anything. Xenos abruptly led the Iron Lady out, promising that he would show her how to return to the city, so it was better for her to return quickly. She was offended and asked him why quickly. Looking around, she immediately asked him why the bed was at the entrance. Xenos thought it would be strange to call it a bedroom. He explained that he would soon throw it away. Krishna looked at the bed incredulously and asked if she could use it. Lily and Xenos opened their mouths in surprise, not expecting such a turn of events. Krishna said that this place is ideal as a base for a secret mission, and she will pay for the accommodation. Submitting them with a frown, she asked if they were against it. Lily and Xenos sighed desperately, raising their heads to the ceiling. After a few minutes, Xenos agreed and offered his hand to the Iron Lady to shake. Krishna thanked him for his cooperation. With the same tenacity and steel, she said that she would definitely catch this arbiter, the root of all evil. Camilla commented that this is how the hospital increased the number of women pestering him. Outside the window, night had long reigned on the face. Bright white stars scattered across the surface of the night. Krishna noticed that it was quiet here at night. Xenos, tousling his hair for the umpteenth time, asked, will she return home after completing the mission? Krishna asked that this is a city destroyed by plague, the undead will not rise. With his hands out intimidatingly, and with a creepy grin, Xenos replied that it could be a raise. He asked if it would be better for her to return then if she was afraid. Krishna gloomily told him not to try to force her to return. Krishna calmly said that Ray's is the highest ghost in the hierarchy of the undead, so they definitely won't meet her here. Xenos thought about how they meet every day. The cup of tea that Lily brought suddenly dropped onto the table. Taking a mug of tea, Krincha took a sip and covered herself with a light blush from the hot temperature, and a little later she completely screamed. She apologized, saying that a sensitive tongue was her only weakness. Xenos noticed that she had quite a few weak points. Lily made an indignant sound. Xenos asked her what it was. Still frowning and angry, she sat down directly between his legs. He raised his hand and began stroking her head, looking stunned at all of Lily's actions. Taking on a smug expression on her face, Lily looked gloatingly at the Iron Lady. Xenos, continuing to stroke her hair, noticed that Lily was acting even more spoiled than usual. Camilla appeared behind him and whispered to him that it was jealousy. Xenos shouted to her that she scared him. Starting to giggle even more, Camilla said that Krishna couldn't see her. At that time, Krishna looked at him incomprehensibly and strangely. Xenos asked why Lily would be jealous of him. Camilla said he started sharing a bed with a woman, suddenly appearing on your doorstep. Lily feels him getting closer to her. Camilla continued to say with joy that he gets along well with non-human girls, and at the same time he doesn't mind giving the bed to the one who shot him with a magic pistol. Apparently, this whole situation seemed funny to her, and she continued to talk about how who would have thought that a girl with such rage attacking him would have a sensitive tongue. She asked him if she would believe that his heart was calm. She asked what should he do now. Smiling sweetly again, she said that the battle for his love would soon begin. Xenos frowned and told her to shut up. Closing his eyes and starting to think about Camille's words, he realized that there was some truth in them. Xenos thought that she had been clinging to him all day. He remembered how Lily suggested that he either peel the apple, then comb it, or blow on the hot one so that it would cool down. Lily still looked at the Iron Lady with hostility. Krishna lowered her gaze thoughtfully and placed her hand on her chin. Lily decided that she was now using the trick that Camilla had taught her. Lily turned sharply to him and, grabbing his cheeks with both hands, shouted that she would not let him sleep that night. A short time later, Lily fell asleep on his lap. Krishna said that she seems to be having good dreams. Xenos agreed and continued to slowly stroke her head. In his mind, he thought that he would talk to Camilla later. After some time, Xenos carried Lily to her room and, carefully putting her into bed, left the bedroom. Going downstairs, he noticed how Krishna was thinking about something for a long time. He asked what she was thinking about. Krishna raised her head and replied that she was thinking about Lily. She asked if he knew the slave traders who captured her. He replied that he did not know and that they left almost immediately, and he immediately gave priority to treatment. Krishna said that there is illegal child trafficking going on somewhere here. She was investigating this case before the current mission. Xenos asked her if that was why she shot him. Krishna sincerely said that she was sorry. She said that her short temper was her only weakness. Xenos asked if she had many weaknesses. She replied that it was not much and looked down. Crossing her arms, she said that she had investigated a variety of cases. She explained that the Steel Lady was the ideal of the Royal Guard, an indispensable hero for the citizens. Still clasping her hands together, she said that no matter how many weak points she had, she would always be on the side of order. Xenos looked somewhere into the distance with a distant gaze, not answering anything to the Iron Lady's story. Suddenly, Krishna said that she wanted to ask him something. Xenos said indifferently to ask. Krishna, unclasping his hands, asked that he must be a master in protective magic. Xenos replied no. Krishna reproached him and told him not to be modest. Krishna said that she would really like to hear his opinion as a master in this field. She looked at him with a serious, persistent look and asked if she had healing magic. Could she be able to grow an arm? Xenos asked, puzzled, what? Krishna waved her hand sharply, putting her palm to her forehead, and asked herself, what was she talking about? She replied that such a thing was impossible unless he was a saint or a high-class healer. While she was guarding a private area for aristocrats, she said, she got into a fight with the leader of the Lizardmen, the leader of a gang of thieves, and inflicted a significant wound on her with a shot in the arm. Krishna continued the story that she recently saw her in the slums, but there was not even a scratch on her hand. She thought a lot about the image of the arbitrator, but she was wondering who Zofia was turning to. Krishna came to the conclusion that if there is someone capable of treating such severe wounds, then such a person must be very famous. Xenos thought with concern that the deputy commander of the Imperial Guard is quite shrewd. Krishna took the cup in her hand again and said that tomorrow she would begin her investigation. With even greater confidence, she said that the arbiter, the instigator of the poor and the root of evil, would definitely fall into her hands. Xenos repeated her words doomedly in his mind, the root of evil. Xenos asked why she was so anti-poor. Putting the tea on the table, she replied that it was a long story. Her look became sad, and she said that her mother died at the hands of the poor. Xenos leaned on his knees and listened carefully to the words of the Iron Lady. Krishna said that her mother was a person of complete compassion, and the people in the slums were hungry and miserable, so she helped them with food. She said with a slightly hoarse voice that one day they brought her corpse home, and it became known that they wanted to steal her wedding ring. Krishna said that her mother saved so many poor people from starvation, but no one could save her. That was the whole reason. Little Krishna set herself the goal of becoming an ideal heroine and destroying all the bad people in the slums so that this would not happen again. She said that over time they began to call her the Steel Lady and that her face was like an iron mask. Krishna admitted that from that day on she forgot how to laugh. She put her hand to her head and looked sadly at the floor, never looking up. Clouds moved smoothly in the morning sky. Opening the creaky gate, Krishna began to move away from his hospital and finally said that he would return in the evening. Camilla appeared behind him and, watching the retreating figure of the Steel Lady, told him not to worry. He couldn't do anything. Xenos exhaled resignedly and agreed. He looked at Camilla and thanked her sincerely. A little embarrassed, Camilla brought her hands closer to her chest and said that she was just getting on her nerves. A short time later, Xenos again used healing magic to heal the wounded hand of the leader of the lizardmen. Continuing to heal, he scolded her for her recklessness and reproached her that he would not be able to cure her when she died. Zofia apologized to him and bowed her head in shame. As soon as he finished, Zofia immediately pressed her hand to her chest and said that she wanted to tell him something important. Xenos asked her what. Zofia raised her index finger and said with irritation that the Steel Lady found out about the referee. Xenos sighed resignedly and leaned harder on the back of the chair. A little confused, Zofia asked him what kind of breath this was. With great excitement, she added that she felt danger around him, and if she suddenly found him, then everything could go wrong. Suddenly, the door to the hospital opened and Krishna came in, apologizing for being a little lost. Xenos, leaning his elbows on his knees, looked at Krishna who had come inside. Zofia did not expect to see her here at all. Suddenly, Krishna took out her magic pistol and, aiming at Zofia, asked her what she forgot here. Zofia shouted a counter-question, "Where is she here from?" Xenos suddenly jumped up and, putting his hands forward in a reconciling gesture, said that they had understood everything wrong. Suddenly came the mocking voice of Camilla, who teased him that he was like a husband who was caught cheating. The girls simultaneously demanded an explanation from him. Krishna, continuing to aim the magic pistol at her, asked her why she was here. Zofia angrily said that this was her question. At that time, Xenos stood between the two girls and looked at one and then the other in disbelief. Krishna turned to him and told him to be careful because Zofia is a real villain. Zofia sarcastically noted that it was the one with the gun who said it. With a malicious look, she asked her if she wanted to start a fight right here. Krishna said that she is not going to destroy this place. Zofia, unable to bear it, shouted, "Why doesn't she remove this thing then?" Krishna still continued to target her, and in a calm voice asked her to let her ask her something. She asked her what happened to her hand. Zofia looked to the side with tension. Krishna continued and noted that her hand was completely healed. She asked again, "Is the one who healed that wound the arbiter?" Zofia instinctively touched her hand and asked in response, "So what?" Losing her temper, she shouted that he had cured the wounded man. Zofia added, "Why shouldn't he have done that?" Krishna replied that they were afraid of the influence of the arbiter. She added that unrest among the poor could threaten the lives of citizens. Zofia asked again, "Poor people?" A minute later, she remarked gloomily that she always blamed the poor. Krishna asked, "What is she talking about?" Zofia waved her hand to the side and told her to look around, because bad people are not only among the poor. She immediately asked if the Gardai were really investigating child trafficking. And immediately after came another question, does she know that the aristocracy is in charge of this? Krishna nervously looked down, thinking in her mind what? She shouted that this was nonsense, because the center of the illegal slave trade should definitely be in the slums. Zofia noted skeptically that the aristocrat would not allow him to be caught so easily. She added that until they were caught, they were not thieves. Zofia said that the aristocrats had to move the children to a special room in a country house. With tension, Krishna said that she couldn't believe it, and if this was really true, then let her tell her who the culprit was. With a barely noticeable grin, Zofia said that it was Galandor. Krishna asked again, "Lord Galandor?" She explained that he was a great man who dedicated himself to providing education to orphans. Waving her palm several times in a circle, Zofia simply replied that this was how he fooled everyone. She immediately added that Krishna was wrong about the judge. This person would never judge them based on their status, appearance, or past. She explained that he simply saves the lives he meets along the way. With warmth in her voice, she said that this is why they value him, and if she gets hurt, he will even heal her. Zofia suddenly shouted that, unlike her, he never equates the poor with criminals. Sticking her hand forward and pointing at the Iron Lady, she again shouted that her sense of justice was simply fake. Krishna shouted the question threateningly. What did she just say? Xenos suddenly covered Zofia with his back. Both girls screamed at him, telling him to move away. Xenos apologized to them and said he would intervene. He admitted that Zofia was still his patient. Krishna asked again, patient. Xenos apologized for not speaking right away. He, without an ounce of hesitation, also admitted that he was the judge. He said he didn't mean to make such a fuss. Krishna, lowering the magic pistol down, said uncertainly that he was lying because he was a master of protective magic, not healing. Xenos immediately replied that he could use both. Krishna, with a slight trembling in her voice, said that who would believe this? She said that she did understand something. Krishna said that he was on the side of this half-man. Turning around and heading towards the exit of the hospital, she said that she went to look for other points of shelter. Her gaze was gloomy, and she said that people need an exemplary hero. Remembering the words of the leader of the lizard people, she shouted to her that it was not a fake. As soon as Krishna left, Zofia clasped her hands together, with great emotion asking the healer's forgiveness for what she had done. Xenos put his hands forward and consoled her, saying that it was not her fault, but on the contrary, it was he who made her worry. Lily at this time looked out the door and watched as Krishna moved away from the city. Xenos, noticing Lily's strange reaction, asked her what it was. Lily replied that she went in the opposite direction from the slums. After thinking a little, she asked if she was lost again. Xenos shouted the question, "What?" Lowering his head and touching his chin with his hand, he said that this could not be. Having made a conclusion, he explained that, most likely, she was not heading to the slums. A short time later, Krishna found himself in the palace. A man in a well-tailored suit sat on the sofa and said that this was unexpected because the deputy commander-in-chief of the Imperial Guard Division himself had come to visit him. Krishna, placing her palms on her knees, apologized for distracting him from his work. Taking a loud sip of tea, she apologized again and said that hot was her only weakness. Lord Gallandor grinned and said with a laugh that even the Iron Lady still has weaknesses. The Lord asked her what she wanted to talk about. Krishna at that time was thinking about rumors and how best to show him that he was selling children. Naturally, she could not say this directly. She came here to see that this was all nonsense. Krishna asked him if he knew that the thieves had entered the special area. Stroking his mustache with his hand, Gallandor replied that he had heard something about a group of thieving lizards. Krishna agreed and said that they were trying to strengthen the defense, but it was simply impossible to cover the entire area. She immediately asked permission to check the inside of the estate, the state of the theft prevention system, and the high-risk location. Krishna looked with a tenacious gaze at the Lord, who, twirling his mustache, was thinking about something. Suddenly, he smiled kindly and said loudly that this was a great idea. He said he was free until dinner so he could accompany her. Krishna said it was a great honor to be personally escorted by the Lord. The Lord moved forward along the corridor, and Krishna followed him with the same fast steps. They first went into the kitchen, but there were no signs that children had been kidnapped and kept there. Then the Lord took her to the bathroom, but she looked around and again saw no evidence. Having walked around the entire palace in the area, Krishna again could not find anything. After a while, when she stood in the palace and looked at Gallandor Park, she thought that the rumors were lies after all, and there was no need to come there. The Lord asked her if she was all right. Taking another look at the palace and its magnificently architectural walls, Krishna said that everything was protected much better than she expected. She opened her mouth to continue her dialogue, but then fell silent. Noticing this, the Lord asked her if something was wrong. Raising her hands up, she hesitantly said that everything was fine. With her hands down along with her head, she apologized and asked if she could use the restroom before leaving. Laughing warmly, the Lord said, of course. Krishna slowly, continuing to think about everything, walked towards the approximate direction of the restroom. She mentally began to reason that although Lord Gallandor is an aristocrat, his status is somewhere between the lowest and middle rank, but despite this, the security here is too strong. She added, it was all focused on the backside. Krishna went outside and began to look around, noticing that in the park, which she had recently looked at through the window, there were more guards. Krishna whispered, all this cannot happen. She remembered that she was forced to hand over the magic pistol at the entrance. Krishna was afraid that without weapons, it would be unsafe. Having made her way behind the guards, she began to climb over the bush fence closer to the well. As Krishna came closer to the well, she noticed that there was a ladder sticking out of the well. Without any doubt, she immediately began to go down and concluded that all the water in the well had dried up. Krishna went down for some time and soon came across a hard floor. Her steps echoed loudly in the corridor of the well. Krishna whispered in a trembling voice that this could not be. Looking around, she noticed a wooden door locked with a key. She pulled off her belt and thought that she had no choice. Approaching the door and putting the belt plaque into the lock, Krishna thought, what if children were kept there? She decidedly thought that she needed to check, because they needed help. She opened her eyes wide and exhaled shakily, seeing in front of her a cage filled with small children who were blindfolded and blindfolded. The children turned to the source of light. They asked, "Who is it?" One of them said in a trembling voice that he was scared. Krishna tremblingly said that everything was fine, and she would not do anything bad to them. She whispered that they must be very scared, and they should wait a little, because she will help them now. One of the children asked her, with an even more trembling voice, who she was. Krishna wanted to tell the children who she was, but she was immediately interrupted by a loud sound and a sharp pain in her chest. She was suddenly thrown from a strong blow into the bars where the children were. The Lord's arrogant voice came from behind her. He said that he was right in thinking about the magic weapons of the Imperial Guard. They are indeed different. He added that it could even be used to intimidate the suckers. He still continued to hold the magic pistol in his hand, from which smoke still continued to flow after the shot. With a crazy smile, he started screaming that he had a feeling that something bad would happen if he was late. With the same crazy laugh, he also said that he didn't expect this. Grabbing her stomach with her hand and crawling away from the cage so that he would not harm the children, Krishna shouted in a trembling and exhausted voice that he was a freak. Suddenly another shot was heard, after which Krishna screamed desperately. Galendor, continuing to aim at her, shouted that people like them cannot imitate the aristocracy. He kept saying in a high voice that he had kidnapped dozens of these suckers from their slums. The Lord shouted that he was the aristocracy here, and, unlike the stupid cattle, he could do whatever he wanted. Krishna mentally began to ask for forgiveness from his mother, whom she began to see before her eyes. Galendor, aiming at her again, shouted how pitiful she looked. He added that hierarchy is justice. He said that she would pay for such behavior with her life. Krishna, not listening to him at all, began to cry and mentally told her mother that she could never become a hero. Outside the well, suddenly there were screams that bandits had broken in. The Lord turned away from the Iron Lady and shouted, "What?" The figure of a girl jumped from the stairs and asked a question for the Lord. How are they still alive? Galendor excitedly recognized her as Stormy Zofia and asked why. Zofia walked slowly towards the Lord, saying that he was living up to expectations in a bad way. Krishna looked at the floor. Tears continued to well up in her eyes. Xenos immediately appeared in the aisle and said with a smile that he had immediately arrived to answer the call and let them be ready, because it would be mortally expensive. Lord Galendor shouted at them, "You freaks." Xenos replied that he should not pay attention, because he was just a bad healer. Zofia, innocently putting her hand behind her head, explained that she was simply a guide. Krishna sat up on his bent arm and looked at them. Lord Galendor suddenly shouted with excitement, "Is there anyone else?" Zofia waved her hand and with a proud smile said that her guys were rampaging on the street and there would be no help for him for some time. The Lord guessed and shouted that they were lizardmen. He added that these are the same bandits about whom there are rumors. He also shouted at them not to try to intimidate him. Putting his hand forward with a pistol, he said that if they were bandits from the slums, then they could simply be shot. Stopping standing still, Xenos went straight to the Lord. Krishna warned him with a trembling voice, saying that a magic pistol without a limiter is extremely deadly. Suddenly, a shot was heard from Lord Galendor's pistol. He immediately shouted, "They are idiots." He added that they are on the territory of a noble aristocratic family and you need to know your place. From the rising dust came the healer's voice, saying that it hurt a little. The Lord opened his eyes, stunned in a silent cry. Xenos stood up and rubbed his bruised shoulder. The Lord shouted with a mixture of fear and fright, "What?" He swore and, looking at the pistols in his hands, asked how they could do that. Raising both pistols into the air, he began shooting throughout the room. The healer's hand flashed several times in the rising dust, but there were no more signs of life. The Lord laughed and shouted that he would teach the beggar a lesson. Suddenly, Xenos emerged from the dust with booming steps. The Lord dropped both pistols to the floor with a scream. Xenos asked him why he was firing from his pistol like crazy. Xenos leaned down for the pistol, saying that it was his weapon. The Lord's gaze became fearful when the muzzle of a pistol was pressed to his forehead. He shouted, "What is he doing?" Xenos coldly told him while shooting at people he needs to be prepared and get shot himself. He advised him not to forget about it and lightly pressed his fingers on the trigger. The Lord abruptly knelt down and, bowing down with his whole body, repentantly shouted that he understood everything. They were honest bandits, and he would pay them. Xenos abruptly cut him off, saying that he was not a bandit. With a slightly trembling voice, the Lord shouted, "What does he want then?" Xenos replied that he simply didn't like it when, without any doubt, they decided to incinerate him with a magic pistol. The Lord asked for an apology and mercy. Xenos answered firmly that no. Galandor exclaimed, "Why?" Xenos shouted at him to apologize to her. The Lord turned to the side where Krishna was lying and said that he was wrong. The blood went to his head a little. He added that he only shot and apologized. Now, turning to the healer, I asked him if such an apology was enough. Xenos said the apology was rejected. The Lord shouted, "Why?" Xenos caustically asked him, does he think he has apologized? Suddenly he said that they were not friends, but that he was just helping her. The Lord shouted, "What bothers him then?" Xenos shouted back that there was someone he should apologize to first. The Lord asked who it was. With a darkened and deadly cold-blooded gaze, Xenos asked, "Does he really not understand?" The Lord with a trembling voice noticed that the healer wanted to scare him and collect a larger ransom. Xenos pushed the pistol forward further, saying that the Lord did not understand him and would have to punish him. Galandor put his hands forward for invisible protection, stuttering, telling him to wait. Xenos shouted for him to feel what it was like. He added that the Lord would be a candidate for patience. The Lord asked him what he was doing. There was a loud sound of a magic pistol firing, followed by the Lord's scream. The Lord flew back into the bars from a strong blow from the pistol, continuing to scream. The Lord fell on his stomach and did not move. Krishna whispered in an exhausted voice, "Did he really kill him?" Continuing to aim his pistol at the Lord, Xenos said that he had turned on the limiter, so the Lord was alive. He added that it was not his place to judge this bastard. Krishna said in a broken voice that it was too late to do anything. She asked him to transfer this matter to the headquarters of the Imperial Guard. Xenos, examining her wound, asked, "Does she serve there?" Immediately after, he said that her left arm and side were hurt, as well as her internal organs. Krishna silently looked away. A little later she asked him, "Is it all over yet?" Xenos joked, saying that this somehow did not fit with the image of the Iron Lady. Her eyes began to fill with tears again. Xenos extended his hand to her wounded chest and caustically said that she would cry later when he gave her the bill. Krishna asked, puzzled, "What?" Xenos began to treat her wounds, and at that time Krishna opened her eyes with even greater surprise. Xenos explained that she had rupture of blood vessels, soft tissues, bone fractures, and tissue death. He said with consolation that the bleeding would stop and all the damage would be healed. Krishna began to speak with a trembling voice and with notes of admiration, but Xenos told her to be silent for a while because she was distracting. After a while, she said that he was a real savior. Xenos smiled and waved it off, saying that it was nothing, and he was an ordinary dark healer from the slums. Sometime later, when Xenos had finished healing, Krishna grabbed her chest with her hand, where there had recently been a bullet wound, and said that she could not believe it all. She noticed that Xenos was amazing at using this healing magic. Xenos sighed displeasedly, leaning his hands on the floor. Krishna continued that it is unthinkable to wield not only protective, but also healing magic at the same time. Xenos said that there was nothing like that. Zofia, who was next to them, said that everything was fine and that she had seen everything herself. Krishna agreed and, bowing respectfully, apologized that she was wrong and now could not consider herself an ideal heroine. Xenos rubbed the back of his head awkwardly and lowered his gaze, and then said that it was impossible to be an ideal hero without fear and reproach. He said that it was impossible to fight for something and not get bruised and injured. With a warm smile, he said that's what healers are for. Krishna called him by name, but he, getting up from the floor, said that he did not like to speak for others, but no matter how badly she was wounded in battle, for them she was without any doubt a real heroine. Krishna asked for whom. Suddenly, the children's voice came from behind her, asking if she had won and if she was okay. Krishna thought and lowered her gaze as she turned to the cage where the children were sitting. Xenos put his hand on her shoulder and began to explain that she was the first to act in a situation where the truth was hidden from outsiders. He said that it was she who opposed the aristocrats. He added that Krishna, knowing about the children who needed her help, decided to save them. With encouragement in his voice, he asked who was the real hero if it wasn't her. Krishna was at a loss, not knowing what to say. She immediately grabbed the bars with her hands and shouted to the children that everything was fine and she would get them out soon. Krishna said in a whisper that she was probably like that too. She said she thought her mother was a pathetic victim, her eyes always sparkling like that when she distributed food to children in the slums. Xenos told her that she has now become a hero for children, and he has no doubt about it. Krishna looked back at him and thought that she was always trying to be perfect. She remembered her clumsy, absent-minded, hot-tempered, funny mother who was simply a flawed person. Krishna said that even with all this, without any doubt, her mother was a real heroine for her. Zofia suddenly shouted that she needed to get out of there. Xenos said that the rest was up to her and that she would soon come to pay for the treatment. Krishna shouted at them sharply and asked why they had come to her aid. Xenos answered thoughtfully she promised to pay for the night, and if she died due to her stupidity, then who would pay him her debt? With a hint of threat in his voice, he told her to pay exactly what she owed. He would include this amount in her medical bill. Krishna was confused, and after a few minutes began laughing loudly and boisterously. Xenos looked at her in surprise and asked what was so funny about this. Krishna thought about the day when her mother died, and she stopped laughing forever. She thought she was so angry and sad that she couldn't even smile. She mentally asked herself how she could smile while at least one criminal was walking free. Krishna looked down and said that now she laughed for the first time. Xenos noticed that she was laughing strangely. Zofia added mockingly that it was even scary. In her defense, Krishna shouted that she had not laughed for a long time. She said that her only weakness was not being able to laugh. Immediately cutting herself off in mid-sentence, Krishna said that this was one of her many shortcomings. At this time, Astan and his squad walked through the snow for a long time and finally came to the place they needed. Astan warned them not to test his patience. A guy with slightly dark skin and short hair complained that he wanted grape wine. A guy with long white hair and a long cloak said that they would soon sort everything out and would definitely catch up in the city. They walked through the cave and their voices echoed loudly. One of them asked if they saw how stunned the girl was from the tavern when she found out that they were from the Golden Phoenix. One of them asked where Andres was going ahead of them. Astan suddenly stopped and reprimanded his team to stop bickering like market women. He ordered them to forget about commoners because now noble ladies would fall in love with them. He explained that they would first become mercenaries of the highest rank, and when they retired, they would become aristocrats. In the depths of the cave sat a family of foxes whose fur blazed with bright fire. Astan shouted for them to just look at this. Suddenly, the firefoxes reared up and, blocking the children with their bodies, growled angrily. Astan shouted angrily that the fireflies were on guard as always. He added, already turning to his team, that the fur of the cubs is softer and more expensive, they need to be careful. Smirking, he said that Lord Fennel would be pleased. Sticking his sword out of its scabbard, he complained with a cry that his blade had already begun to become covered with rust. Astan ordered Guile to use protective spells. The firelesses were already attacking them. Guile immediately took a piece of paper from his bag and drew a circle around them. Astan at that time swung his sword at the firefox running towards him. He tried to hit the creature in the side with a slashing motion, but the firelies managed to dodge and scorch his hand with fire. Astan shouted all sorts of curse words he knew. He shouted that he was hot. Looking at his disfigured and burned hand, Astan asked why. He immediately heard a scream and turned to the side in confusion, noticing that his partner was being chewed on the shoulder by a firefox. Guile screamed that he was in pain. Having lost control of the situation, Astan angrily shouted, "What's going on?" At this time, Ognales opened his mouth, from which flames rushed out in a huge stream. Astan immediately looked back and immediately gave the command to quickly use the attacking spell. Andres shouted that he was already doing magic. Astan angrily shouted at him not to slow down. He asked why he was digging. Andres shouted that a little more. Astan cursed and shouted, "Is this what Guile calls defensive magic?" Guile shouted with panic in his voice that he did everything right and didn't understand why this was happening. The Ognalises continued to attack them, clinging to their shoulders. Astan, continuing to fight off the firefox with his sword, asked what is attack magic and where is it. Andres shouted back that in order not to damage their skins, the magician needed to debug it more precisely. He would need more time. Astan swore and shouted that they were retreating. Helping each other get out, they left the cave. First of all, Astan began to scold them that how could they not deal with the unfortunate foxes. Andres, pointing his finger at him, shouted that Astan did not fight normally at all. He asked him what kind of ballet it was. Astan yelled angrily. Yuma, leaning on his partner's shoulder, whispered in a trembling voice that they had been beaten. Guile suddenly asked if the idiot they had recently kicked out of the team was right. They remembered how Xenos explained to them that if his companions were injured, he would cast an immediate healing spell, and in addition, he used protective magic, so it was very difficult to injure them. Xenos also said that with strengthening spells, he increases strength in battle. Astan angrily waved it off, saying that this doesn't happen. Guile hesitantly agreed with him. Astan, after thinking a little, said that it was possible to hire a healer. He thought that he was under threat of completing a task from the 7 great houses, and he had no room for error. Astan said that when he returned to the nearest city, he would contact the guild. 10 days have passed since the last fight with the fireflies. Astan thought he had wasted so much time. He turned to Woman in the fur coat and asked her to be helpful. Woman pressed her hand to the plaque on her cloak and told them not to hope for it, because she is usually a healer in the Royal Guard, and she only has the qualifications of an adventurer. She immediately asked why the Golden Phoenix, who was known to be able to defeat even first-class magical beasts, was seeking the support of a mid-level healer like her. Astan said angrily that there is a lot going on here too. Suddenly Guile asked her if everything would be okay with their wounded partner. Woman said doubtfully that he survived, but was no longer ready for adventure. Andres asked what he was going to do. Astan said they would just bring his skin home. Astan remembered the aristocrat's words that she wanted to give her daughter a fox fur scarf for her birthday. She said that this was a direct request from Lord Fennel of the noble lord family and a great opportunity to sell the Golden Phoenix name. Astan decided that today he should get the skin and go home. He thought that Yuma was not worthy of the glorious Golden Phoenix. Astan made a remark so that Andres should not delay with his magic. Andres said he knew and was prepared for this. Astan asked if Guile had been drinking this time. Guile replied that everything was fine. Suddenly, fireflies ran out of the cave and began to sharply attack their team. One of the foxes opened its mouth and released a huge stream of energy at them. Astan put his sword forward and, turning it horizontally, pushed away the flames. Astan ordered everyone to take cover. Guile shouted at him to trust him. Taking the same magic piece of paper, he drew a circle around him and his partners. Astan thought that now all they could do was slowly reduce their numbers. Andres, not having time to dodge the firefox's attack, flew out of the circle and hit the ground with a hard sound. Astan shouted, "Why is he doing here?" He ordered him to get up quickly, but Andres continued to scream and clutch his chest in pain. Astan swore and shouted why he couldn't hit anything. Vimun called him desperately. With rage, he asked her what. She asked excitedly if they were still continuing. Vimun shouted that Andres was in danger if he did not receive proper treatment. Astan looked back at them and thought that it would be difficult to finish off the beast alone when his body was so weak. He thought that Andres and his destructive magic were needed. He reasoned that even if they persisted here, they would only exhaust themselves until they could use his magic. Astan cursed loudly and went to the exit of the cave with his team. Sometime later, when they had moved away from the cave to safe territory, Astan shouted, "What's going on?" He shouted that Guile no longer had to make excuses about his poor form. Astan grabbed him by the clothes and lifted him up slightly. Guile said in confusion that he did not know or understand everything that was happening. Vimun said that the protective magic was turned on, and without it Andres would have died instantly. Astan told Vimun to heal him quickly. Vimun made a remark so that he should not speak as if it were easy. Vimun explained that they should create a formula and cast spells depending on the condition of the wound. She added that they gave him first aid, so they should urgently send him to a hospital with restoration magic. Astan asked what. He explained that they did not have time for this, and she needed to cure him right here and now. Vimun asked what they were talking about. She said that even a senior healer would not be able to fully heal him here. Putting her hand on her chin and thinking, she said that only a few special healers and saints would be able to do such a thing. Astan asked in confusion, what? He thought that ever since they got rid of this guy, the group had not remained unscathed. Astan remembered how Xenos said that, if necessary, he supports magic, protection, and strength, and in case of injury, he heals instantly. He asked himself who can use a special class of healing magic without a healer's license. He wearily repeated Vimon's recent words that she was a healer. Astan asked if she was joking. He added that the only reason he did not accept him was that the existence of such a person is difficult to imagine. He immediately thought that the poor man couldn't do it, and one thing was for sure, time was running out on the task. Astan was holding a letter in his hands. This letter said that he was a fool for expecting anything from him. They threatened him in a letter and told him never to show his face again. Astan shouted in panic to wait for him. He asked to be allowed to talk to the Lord. The servant reported that their mistress's birthday had passed. He asked why they came. He explained, adjusting his monocle over his eye, that the Lord's anger was not only due to their failure. The servant added that he thought it was impossible. He could have called earlier and saved himself the embarrassment of coming to the lady's birthday party empty-handed. Astan grabbed the servant by the shoulders and shouted that everything was fine with them. He said that they were close to defeating the Fire Fox. The servant asked him what he was talking about. Astan explained that there was a traitor in the group, and they were one step away from ending him when that freak Xenos suddenly left them. The servant thought for a moment and said that he had never heard of a Golden Phoenix member with that name. Astan thought that this was correct because they did not write about this in official or written documents, so as not to leave the people from the slums in the group in the past. He immediately shouted that he had made a mistake. He also added that an archer named Yuma betrayed them. Guile called out to him and asked what he was talking about. Astan turned to him and shouted that it was true and he was useless. The servant coughed and said that he was sorry, but the group's problems should be solved by the group. Astan fell to his knees and begged for another chance. The servant, turning to him, said that he knew about 2 wounded members of their group who were lying in the hospital. He asked what chance could he give to a group with only half the members left. Astan said that it was no big deal because they would soon have a good replacement and demanded another chance. The servant lowered his head and said that he would inform the Lord. Astan thanked him loudly. Guile asked him what he was going to do after such words. Astan told him not to worry because there was another slave in their group. Astan said that Xenos would love to return and would even cry if he returned it. He mentally turned to the healer so that he would begin to thank him because he himself was following him. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Xenos sneezed and almost choked on his tea. Lily asked if he was okay. The raid, in any case, took a lot of time and effort. The same thing happened with completing tasks for guilds. Moving around loaded with equipment, food, and things takes time and effort, which is why they came up with the idea of including poor people in the detachment. These monsters of society can be used as much as you like. Astan remembered how he found the healer among the bags, barrels, and boxes. He approached him and asked what he was doing. Xenos muttered, looking down, nothing. Astan extended his hand to him and suggested that if he was not busy with anything, he would go on a raid with them. Xenos looked up, filled with hope and surprise, and said that poor people cannot be adventurers. Tilting his head to the side, Astan said that he didn't care about those social classes as long as the person was motivated and capable. He asked him if he knew how to do something. Xenos said that he heals a little with magic. Astan said that they don't have a doctor, so let him join their squad. Guile asked him what he was doing. Astan waved him off and asked him not to pay attention. Rubbing his forehead, he said that he had no intention of returning to this terrible place. Guile said his opinion that Xenos died a long time ago. Astan objected and said that he might be alive because he gave him a gold coin as a parting gift, so he should last longer. Guile commented that these slums are large. He asked how they would search. Astan said that he has one idea, because in the slums 3 main groups of non-humans are fighting for territory. He said that they would be the ones asked to find him, because they collect information from all the slums. Seeing the lizardman in front of him, Astan asked him if he would take him to their leader. He said he had a job offer. The lizardman asked about work and who are they. Astan replied that he was a gold-level squad leader. Taking out his business card and showing it to the lizardman, he told him not to doubt it. The lizardman suddenly moved forward and commanded them to follow him. The lizardman entered the tent and turned to his leader, saying that the man wanted to offer her a job. She asked again work. Zofia immediately said that she was busy and was going to meet the doc. Astan immediately said that he was the commander of the Golden Phoenix Gold-Level Adventure Squad. Zofia said boredly, "Get to the point." Astan asked them to help find one person. He said his name and explained that he had fled to the slums about 2 months ago. Zofia suddenly laughed. Astan asked how so. Zofia said with a grin that this was the same ugly squad that was rumored to have expelled the healer. Giggling, she noticed that their faces really did look like those of idiots. Astan shouted, "How dare she?" Zofia waved her hand and ordered them to get out, because she didn't have time to look for someone they weren't worthy of. Astan asked if she knew him and what was going on here. Zofia leaned her elbows on the pillows on the sofa and said that she didn't care about idiots. Astan growled and, drawing his sword from its sheath, asked who she took him for. She looked at him with indifference and asked, "But does he know who he's talking to?" Astan stopped and, turning around, said that he had just wasted his time. Zofia shouted that if they touched him, they wouldn't get away with it. They decided to go to the next group. After some time, they ended up with the leader of the werewolves. She greeted them with a joyful smile and greeted them as if they were idiots who had kicked out Mr. Healer. She said with a grin that they were better off dead and turned into dung flies. Astan asked if she knew him too. Linga said that the healer does not care about dung flies, and it would be in their best interest to leave here immediately. Astan shouted, "How dare she?" Linga was surrounded by werewolves and asked with a grin if they were in trouble. She said that if they behave inappropriately with the master, the werewolves will not forgive them. After some time, when they moved away from the group of werewolves, Astan shouted, "What's going on here?" The next ones they went to were the orcs. The orcs asked them what they wanted from him again. They immediately turned around and began to leave. Levi shouted to them that if they bother him, the orc clan will not remain silent. Astan reasoned that all 3 of these groups simply adore their former partner, but this simply cannot happen. He concluded that there was someone else powerful with the same name. Guile asked, "What about the talk about expulsion from the squad?" Astan replied that these were cases of coincidence. Astan thought about the last option, where Xenos was really influential. He thought angrily that the one he always looked down on was admired by the leaders of the underworld. He will never believe it. Astan said they will find him. Guile turned sharply at the familiar voice. Xenos called Lily and explained to her that the slums were full of confusing streets. Guile called out to his partner, pointing his gaze at the retreating back of the healer's former partner. Astan thought he had finally found him and called him. Xenos asked with surprise and excitement, Astan and Guile. Astan mockingly pointed out that Xenos was still alive. Xenos turned around sharply and indifferently shouted that he had something to do. Astan shouted at him to stop. He continued furiously, saying that he was looking for him. Xenos asked him why. Astan, pointing his finger at him, ordered him to rejoice and said that he was returning him to the Golden Phoenix. Xenos said indifferently that he would not go. Astan said with a grin that it's not every day that you get such a favor. He suddenly exclaimed, not expecting such an answer, "What?" Astan asked with a trembling voice whether he had heard that he would not go with them. Xenos confirmed. Astan resignedly asked him why. Xenos, running his hand through his hair, asked him in response, "Why not?" Xenos abruptly began to list the facts that they were treated unfairly, the pay was meager, and there were no benefits. Concluding, he said that in such cases they usually refuse. Astan said that everything will be different because he invites him. Xenos, crossing his arms, began to reason that in his free time he might even think about accompanying them on a raid, but only if he was paid well. Astan asked him what. Xenos said he no longer works without receiving benefits in return. He added that he would charge 1 million when for one healing, 3 times that for using defensive magic and enhancing abilities. Xenos put 3 fingers forward, saying that bargaining was not negotiable. Astan shouted at him in indignation. What did he think of himself? He added furiously that even here he had nowhere to go. Passing by, an orc greeted the healer. Xenos looked back and with a warm smile asked how his legs were. The orc replied that thanks to him, everything was fine with him. He added that his wound healed instantly, and it was all thanks to his treatment. Xenos advised him not to burden himself. Smiling, the orc announced that they had the finest meat and were looking forward to it next time. Xenos thanked him. Astan began to suspect something. Guile, stunned, said that this was the same Xenos. Astan thought that it was thanks to his former partner that their team remained unharmed. Guile sharply began to reproach him for kicking him out. He asked him what Astan will do now. Astan sarcastically shouted back that didn't they all agree with him? Lily commented that these guys are very noisy. Astan shouted to her that he was no uncle. Xenos turned around and said they were leaving. Astan shouted at his back, "Is he leaving so easily?" In a slightly calm voice, he asked him if he really didn't want to return to them. Zenos said with a grin that he was happy here too. Not believing it all, Astan shouted, "It's he who's asking him." He added that it was he who picked him up and gave him shelter. Zenos apologized and said without a smile that it was too late. Astan put his hand forward as if trying to stop him. He whispered bitterly that he should not dare ignore him. He asked in a whisper whether he was really so flattered by the adoration of freaks. He added that one day he would become an aristocrat, and he would not be happy. He took his sword out of its sheath and began to swing at the healer, but was suddenly shot in his side. Astan flew into the wall and broke through it. Krishna said that he is impudent if he has the audacity to attack in front of her. She added that the Imperial Guard Division would not let him get away with this. Astan asked doomedly, "A division of the Imperial Guard?" Zenos asked her what she forgot here. Krishna replied that she had come to visit him. Touching her hand, she said that she had scratched her finger. Zenos caustically answered her that she should lick it and everything will pass. She said that she would pay for all the treatment. Zenos gave in and agreed. Astan at this time remembered that Krishna had solved several cases and was rumored to have become the youngest deputy division commander of the Imperial Guard. He asked himself how it happened that she became friends with the healer. Astan, getting to his feet, asked him who he was and what it all meant. Krishna immediately said that she would take him to the police station for attempting to attack. Astan shouted desperately and said that he was forced and did not want to attack. Guile asked him what he was doing. Astan suddenly jumped up and began to run away, limping. Guile shouted to him, "Where is he going?" Astan coughed and mentally warned the healer not to dare ignore him. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Zofia dipped her finger into the viscous liquid and, after tasting it, commented that the jam was delicious. Linga said that she made this jam from apples. Levi said she helped her too. Linga turned to Levi, saying that she only helped carry the pan and she did everything else. Levi immediately objected, saying that she was the one who got the apples. Levi reproachfully asked her who confused sugar with salt in the first place. Linga became worried and, squeezing the jar harder with her hands, said that she had promised not to talk. Zofia commented sarcastically that the orc leader and the terrifying werewolf were making jam together. She asked what was going on. Levi explained to her that while she showed herself in business with that aristocrat, they were out of business. Zofia, drawing out her words, asked if they had decided to unite in order to appear in a better light. Zofia asked them with a grin if they really think they can beat her with some kind of jam. She added that she is still one step ahead in the fight for a healer. Levi said with doom that it was sad, but there was nothing to cover it with. Zenos immediately said that he heard everything from the very beginning. He advised them to take him into account in their conversations. He added that they should have lunch. Zenos turned to Lily and asked if she would make some tea if there was any left. Lily nodded. Zenos took a knife and, opening a jar of jam, spread it on the bread. Having taken a bite and started chewing, he said with his mouth full that it was very tasty. Zofia warned him not to say that, even if it was true, because they were arrogant. Linga squealed that she was happy. Levi commented that she was about to cry because they won. Camilla announced, giggling, that it was a draw for now. Zofia suddenly began to tell her that the other day idiots showed up to her and kicked him out of the squad. Zenos asked, unsurprised, Astan. Zofia said that kicking him out was the height of stupidity on their part. Linga added that they also visited her. Levi added that these freaks dared to come to her. Zofia said that she had a bad feeling about the most important member of his team, and she asked one of her guys to follow him. She added that they were never able to determine his whereabouts. Linga said that even her werewolf sense of smell couldn't cope. Levi explained that she didn't get caught in the orcs' net either. Lily wondered if they had returned to their neighborhood. Zofia replied hopefully that she would like it to be that way. Linga noted that there would be problems if he went deeper. Livy agreed with her, because in the slums there is a bottom where even notorious freaks cannot get. Zenos asked, the bottom of the slums. Camilla explained that they were talking about an underground guild. Zenos asked in confusion, an underground guild. Zofia explained that it was otherwise called an illegal guild, and they usually went there if they needed to do work that they couldn't do themselves. Ordinary guilds work according to established rules, approved by the state regarding the content of orders and payment systems. To become part of this system, you must pass a certification test. However, in the underground guild, there are no such rules. They will take on any task for money. Drug trafficking, murder, organizing revenge. Rumor has it that an underground guild was involved in an aristocrat's child trafficking case. Lily cringed and asked with excitement, what if this noisy uncle asked bad things from this underground guild? Zenos approved. Was Astan the noisy uncle? Zenos sipped his tea and said that he had heard about the underground guild and the order would cost a tidy sum. Camilla began to reason that since they had specifically gone into the slums to find him, then their state of affairs was probably very disastrous. Lily sighed with relief and said that Camilla calmed her down. She suddenly asked, watching Zofia sit very thoughtfully, is something wrong? Zofia said that she remembered out loud about an underground guild in which there is someone who has recently been accepting orders under certain conditions instead of money. She added with doubt that he was called a conductor. At this time, into the underground guild, a man who put a hood over himself said welcome. He asked a new client how he found this place. Suddenly realizing and crossing his arms, he asked that he was sent here because there was not enough money to pay for the order. The man in the hood said that such things happen often and that he shouldn't worry because he doesn't only take money for it. He said his name with a dangerous smile. The conductor asked what his order was. A short time later, after listening to the whole story, the guide summed up the need to organize revenge. He also repeated the client's words that he could not stand not only this man, but also his henchmen. The conductor with a smile asked if he would tell him the reason. The conductor answered the question that this needs to be told. He explained that the rest of the underground guild may not be interested in the reason, they just want to be paid quickly, but for him it is very important. After some time, the guide said that the reason was rather perverted and selfish. He added that this was more likely not revenge, but a simple insult. The conductor consoled the client, saying that he would not refuse. He took out a stone that fit in his palm and said that he was just doing some research and thought it was time to use this sample. Astan told him not to worry. The guide, giving him the black stone, announced that his order would be carried out properly. The conductor asked if he would give his name. With a creepy smile, he said that he would remember it. Meanwhile, at night in the hospital, Zenos was sitting at the kitchen table and thinking about something. Lily asked him if he couldn't sleep. Zenos apologized and said that he would soon go to bed. Lily asked if he would have black tea. Starting to doubt, she asked if he would be able to sleep after this. Zenos replied that everything was fine. He asked her if she would bring it. After a while, he took a sip of tea. Lily asked how it happened. Zenos said that, as always, it was very tasty. He thanked her. Lily suddenly patted his head. She immediately explained that when she couldn't sleep, he stroked her head. Zenos replied that she helped him out, and now he will sleep well. After a while, Lily went to her room and fell asleep. Zenos came to the kitchen. Camilla was sitting at the table and sipping tea in solitude. She asked him if he couldn't sleep. Zenos asked in response, why isn't she sleeping? Camilla explained that Lily had prepared 3 cups of tea, so she couldn't help but drink it. Zenos said that Lily is a very caring girl. Camilla asked him, he keeps thinking about his former squad, that's why sleep doesn't come to him. Zenos asked if she was worried about him. Camilla shouted negatively that this is not the case. She said that she only wanted to chat a little since they had nothing to do at night. Zenos admitted that he was really preoccupied with thoughts about his former squad. He explained that when he opened the hospital, he was so busy and didn't remember about it. He said sadly that he now remembered how they treated him. Zenos regrets that he never hit him. Camilla frankly said that human life is short and fleeting, so it is better to return the favor while it is still possible. Zenos looked at his hand and said that she was probably right. He said that the recent meeting with him brought back memories of the old days when he had not yet joined the unit. Camilla asked, those days when he lived in the slums? Zenos confirmed. Camilla said she heard how he mastered healer magic there. She asked how he did it. Zenos began to say that he originally lived in a local shelter, and only now he understands how terrible it was. Every day in the slums was filled with many deaths. At the shelter, they were tasked with robbing corpses and taking whatever they could get money for. He said that he was against it, so he buried the corpses without taking anything, and he was often beaten for this. If he had left the corpse there, it could have caused an epidemic. Camilla said he did the right thing. Zenos answered honestly that he didn't think about it at the time. He only felt sorry for them. They already died, and they were also robbed. So he buried it so that no one would steal their things. Looking at the prone bodies, he seemed to be looking at him from tomorrow. Well, despite his efforts, they were often dug up. He said that one day he naively thought, what if he resurrected him? Camilla suddenly shouted, this is a forbidden spell. Zenos said he didn't know it at the time and was desperately trying to resurrect every day. Placing his hands over the body, he imagined how this body was being restored. But of course, nothing happened, so he painstakingly studied the bodies. He studied how the skin is structured, how blood vessels and nerves pass, how muscles are attached, and how organs are located. At that time, he had no idea about anatomy and did not understand what was needed and how it functioned. But he never stopped thinking, imagining, and observing. Xenos walked methodically, step by step, until he could clearly reproduce the structure of the body in his head. Camilla covered her mouth with her hands. She thought that all sorts of species lived and died in the slums. Does this mean that Xenos mastered the structure of bodies from his own experience? She thought, how many healers like him are there in the world? She said with delight that this could drive you crazy. Xenos continued and said that at first his studies were of little use, but he continued day after day, year after year, until his body began to be engulfed in white light. He felt a response and then thought that his plan would work out. But on the day when Xenos tried to resurrect, he was caught and grabbed by the scruff of the neck, dragging him away from the corpse. The man yelled at him and told him to never use that power on the dead. He said it should be spent on the living. Camilla asked if this was the healer he met in the slums. Xenos agreed and said that he had seen him use healing magic the one and only time. He thought that he never knew his real name. Xenos said that to him, who knew nothing but the world of slums. He opened a whole world. He said that this magician was cool, although he looked suspicious. Xenos explained that the mentor had many favorite phrases, but he heard this one more often than others. Clearing his voice, he began to say, a third-rate healer only heals wounds, a second-rate healer heals people, and a first-rate healer fixes the world. Xenos proudly said that he remembered him and wondered if he had even become third-rate. Having come to his senses, he said that he must have tired her with his stories. Camilla objected and replied that she had a great time passing the time. Xenos told her that it was nice. Camilla suddenly said that this, of course, is different from resurrection magic. But in her time, there was magic that made it possible to create a golem, a kind of living creature. After taking a sip of tea, she said that 300 years ago, that's when the demon lord was still alive. She began her story that about 400 years ago, demons invaded human territory. This is stated in the legend about the great battle of humans and demons. 100 years have passed since the demon lord was destroyed since the war began. Camilla said that now this is already a lost magic of darkness, but then golems were created using a magic stone from sulfur, carbon, and other components. She added that they knew neither pain nor fear. Camilla explained that the golem, which meekly followed orders, was a very unpleasant opponent. Xenos suddenly asked her what she was doing 300 years ago. Camilla replied that it was so long ago and she no longer remembers. A loud sound was heard outside the walls of the hospital. Turning back, Xenos asked what was that noise. Camilla replied that it looked like it was somewhere in the slums and went upstairs. She said with fear that she couldn't believe her eyes. She shouted that the golem they were just talking about was rampaging through the slums.